and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack
and Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff this week on the show. Just a nice, friendly catch-up episode. It has been a busy couple of weeks here. We did our Akira Toriyama tribute episode 2 weeks back, which I was very happy we were able to do, and a lot of nice comments on that, so thank you guys for that. In the meantime, we've been working on Japanimation Station. I took a trip to Boston. Maybe you'll hear about that today. It's been busy. We've been playing games. I think we're going to give our final thoughts today on Persona 3 Reload and Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, two extraordinarily long games we've been playing.
Yes.
And you finished that, right? I think you told me you were about done.
Yeah, I finished that near the end of spring break. Spring break was critical for me to be able to finish Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth.
Nice. So yeah, we finished our very long games and are presumably moving on to new things, and we can talk about that. But yeah, should be a fun episode. I want to talk about a little bit of news. I just want to talk about the PS5 Pro, which was kind of detailed in rumors today, and that'll be our news segment. Basically to answer the question, what the fuck are we doing here? Which I think is the question on basically everybody's mind. So there we go. Housekeeping stuff. Japanimation Station has been on a little bit of a break while we're working on the next part of Season 4. Season 4, Part 5, which is the part nobody saw coming. It's called Japanimation Station, Splendid Isolation. We are talking about love, Chunibyo, and other delusions. That's all one show. Yeah. Tamako Market. Tamako Love Story. That's the movie of Tamako Market. We're talking about Beyond the Boundary and its movie. We're talking about Myriad Colors Phantom World. Didn't get a movie. We're going to talk about that too. So all of that and more when Part 5 returns. It's going to be really good. Provisionally, this could slip. Right now, I have it planned for Easter Sunday return date. That would be this coming Sunday, the 31st. If I feel like something weird is happening, we need a little more time before premiering, because I just want to have enough episodes stacked up so there won't be any more breaks for this next part. That'll be coming when we get to Season 4, Part 6. That is Sound Euphonium and all of that good stuff. When we get to Season 4, Part 7, that's the actual end of Season 4, and it's Violet Evergarden, and should be some good stuff. So we're roughly past the halfway point. We got a lot left.
I mean, at this point, we should just say that Part 7 is most likely the end. We don't know. There's been multiple times over the course of the Kyoto Vacation where we have swerved from our original designs. But yes. So we're working on our hidden part 5, which is very fun and very exciting. And I like the idea. I hope we can have it come back on Easter Sunday, because I like the idea of celebrating the return of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and the return of Japanimation Station, because one of those
I'm writing that down right now. Celebrate the return of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ with the return of everyone's Messiah of anime podcasts, Japanimation Station. I'm going to turn that into what?
Truly, the cultural significance of these two things can be weighed equally, right? Jesus Christ and Japanimation Station Kyoto Vacation. They're basically interchangeable.
I agree, and I think I'm writing that down so that I can make a poster for the return of Japanimation Station with that tagline and put it out, and just see, can I bait anyone to send us death threats? Yes. Because that's when we'll know we've made it. Is when we start getting the death threats. Yeah,
there'll be someone online that will dig that out and be like, oh, these fuckers need to die, because that's what Jesus would have wanted.
Well, yeah. I mean, when John Lennon said the Beatles were bigger than Jesus, they had to leave the country. So, exactly. And go live in India for a year studying under the Maharishi. So, maybe that is what will happen next, is Japanimation Station's transcendental meditation vacation, when we have to leave the country. We will literally
have to take a Kyoto vacation, because we will have to leave the country and go flee to Kyoto.
Go somewhere where no one cares about Jesus. Have we alienated our entire listener base yet, Sean?
Yes, that was my goal, to write at the beginning of the podcast.
So that's Japanimation Station over on JonathanLack.com, the Weekly Stuff Wordcast, as I'm still calling it, because it makes me laugh. There's a lot of exciting stuff going on. We finished the Rocky in Review series that was happening. Now there is a series that I am calling Miyazaki Madness. And it is all the reviews I've written over the years. of Hayao Miyazaki's filmography. That's 15 parts for all the films he's directed, but also the films he's written. And part 2 published last week on Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Part 3 on Laputa, Castle in the Sky, will be this week. These are, again, pulled from my book, 200 Reviews, which you can go buy in paperback or on Kindle. And it's all good stuff. And I say over the years, most of these had never been published until 200 Reviews. So it's a lot of good stuff, and I'm excited for people to see that. The Yu-Gi-Oh! Kill Count series is still going strong. I think we just published part 7 this week. I know I had to go back in and kind of finish up the project because I had put the first 6 parts up, like, scheduled out, and then I had to do it's going to part 12, and it is all done now and ready to go. I think that ends in late April. But yes, part 7 published this week, and that is when the part of the story where Battle City, they get on a big blimp and go play card games in the sky, and Yami Bakura comes out and starts murdering people. It's good. The Kill Count, there's a lot of good stuff to come. I just have to say, if you've been following the Yu-Gi-Oh! Kill Count series, the best is yet to come, because once we get to Ancient Egypt, there's a lot of me scouring panels to see just how many people does Thief King Bakura kill here. It's a lot.
You know, there's more murder involved in children's card games than one would expect.
Indeed. All right. In terms of stuff, Sean, what have you been up to?
That's the big question, because it's been a while. Obviously, I'll save the Yakuza for the end.
The video game, not the criminal organization.
Well,
Sean has not joined the Yakuza.
No. I mean, I'm getting a sick Shinron back tattoo after the loss of Toriyama. I'm fully committed now. But that's for another podcast. After I finished Yakuza, I was faced with a crisis of choice where there are like so many fucking games out right now that I really want to play, and most of them are like 100 hours long. And I was looking at all of those. I was like, what game should I play? And then I was like, I'm just going to replay Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. So that's what I've been doing for the past week, basically, because they, for people who don't remember, that's the CyberConnect 2 developed big Dragon Ball Z 3D kind of like action RPG. It's sort of like if you took the Legacy of Goku games, but put a kind of like light action combat system on them, and tells the story of Dragon Ball Z from Raditz showing up to the end of the Buu saga. And it came out forever ago, I think like 2018 or something like that. And I played it when it came out.
2020, but yeah.
It was really 2020 because it was originally a PS4 game.
Right, but the PS5 is the end of 2020.
Yes, okay.
Yeah,
so
it was January 2020. So that is why there's confusion. It was the very, very, very beginning of 2020.
Yeah, so I played it when it came out on the PS4. They did a free PS5 update, so I got that version, and then I bought the DLC, which there's been a lot of DLC. Bandai Namco has been on a weird thing with some Dragon Ball games where they just have like put out DLC for fucking ever. Like Xenoverse 2 is still getting DLC to this day, which is just madness. But Dragon Ball Z Kakarot is a much better game than Xenoverse 2. So I haven't actually done any of the DLC yet, but they've got DLC for the original 2 Super movies, Battle of Gods and then Resurrection F. They did those around the time the game came out. Then they did a Future Trunks DLC for that like OVA. They did a Bardock DLC. They did a the last World Martial Arts Tournament for the end of original Dragon Ball. That's a DLC. And then they have done End of Z, which just came out. All the stuff that's like the epilogue at the end of the original series with Oob and all that stuff. So I'm excited to get to those because I'm in the middle of the Buu saga. So I'm getting pretty close to finishing the replay because it's not really that long of a game in the grand scheme of things for something like this. Like it's maybe about 20 hours to finish the main storyline if you don't like sort of get bogged down in just doing every random little tiny side thing along the way. And I've been having a very good time. Obviously, the big thing that spurred this is Toriyama's passing and making me want to just sort of like get into some Dragon Ball stuff. And it is just a fun time. It is weird though with the PS5 version. There's the PS5 version is overall very good, but there's a couple of specific design choices they made that makes it very frustrating to pick if you want to do the 4K 30 frames per second mode or the lower resolution but 60 frames per second mode, because neither one is quite right, but for very particular reasons. If you do the 60 FPS mode, the problem is that there are lots of cinematic cut-ins in the game that run at 30 frames per second, because the game was originally just designed to be 30. And they happen all the time in the middle of like the big boss fights, which are frequent in the game, because that's kind of like the big thing with the game. So like if you play in the 60 FPS mode, you're constantly getting these like cutaways to shots that are trying to replicate like manga frames and stuff like, or manga panels of like Vegeta doing his Gallic gun shot and stuff like that. But those very cinematic cut-ins are just animated at 30 frames per second, which is very kind of disorienting. But if you play in the 4K 30 FPS mode, which is what I've ultimately decided to do because I think it's less distracting to me, because the game does not need to run at a high frame rate and it looks incredibly sharp and nice, because there's a lot of very sharp lines which look really good at high resolution. The only problem is when you get the very big elaborate cutscenes, those cutscenes are encoded at 1080p. So those cutscenes all of a sudden, in comparison to your like in real-time gameplay stuff, look incredibly like a grimy and fuzzy. But those are very few and far between. So that is like, if there's anyone else who's interested in playing Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, it is just like this little annoying tiny thing about that game on PS5 that has been kind of amusing. But overall, I've just been having a good time playing that game, flying around, listening to the music. That's one of the best things about that game is it's got reinterpretations of a lot of the music from the original show, which is rare.
The Shinsuke Kikuchi tracks, the original composer.
Which is rare in a lot of Dragon Ball games. You don't often get that. And down to stuff of like when you get to the Buu saga, they switch over to like the instrumental versions of We Were Angels and stuff like that, which is fucking awesome. And it like the vibes of the game are very excellent in terms of capturing the feel of watching the anime and getting that, and the it looks incredibly good again, especially if you play on the 4K mode, where it got used to the 30 frames per second very quickly. The character models look so sharp, and it's that thing of like those really kind of sharp lines that characters are drawn with because it's meant to replicate the manga style. Like that stuff just like really exposes the resolution so clearly, in the same way that like text in a game feels like to me is like the easiest way you can tell what resolution it is, because you have this very distinct fine line. And so it's a very good showcase for a very high resolution display, and it just is it's fun. So it's a good time going around and reliving some Dragon Ball nostalgia.
It's actually funny, the night he passed away, I picked it up on Switch because it just coincidentally was on sale for like $10 with the DLC. I don't think all the DLC, but like the first pack or two, like the Trunks DLC. And I have played a little bit of it. I was thinking I would play more while I was on my trip to Boston, and I had no downtime for stuff like that. So I didn't play anything. I brought my Switch but didn't even open the case I keep it in. It is, I will say though, because of all those lines, and they didn't put anti-aliasing on the Switch version, it is Blur City. Still, like, the aesthetic of the game looks nice. It is a colorful game. It captures the art style. But I'm not deep enough in to know how much of a problem that is. But yeah.
Yeah, because it very much was not like it was not like sort of clearly designed with the Switch as its main target platform. It's clearly meant to be a PS4, Xbox One game. Yeah, but yeah, it's fun. It does start very slow. Like that's something I'd forgotten about it. That it is kind of the problem with a lot of Dragon Ball Z games where they start at the Raditz stuff, which is not the most interesting thing in Dragon Ball Z. So it's like once you get through the Raditz stuff and then you play as Kid Gohan getting trained by Piccolo, that's where the game really picks up. But it definitely was like a little bit of me having to get through the Raditz stuff, which is fine in like the manga or anime, but it definitely is very tedious that every Dragon Ball Z game has to start with you doing the Raditz fight.
Well, you got to do it. I am impressed at the beginning of that game because that game starts with like a solid 20 minutes of Masako Nozawa talking to herself, of just Goku and Gohan running around, like more so than in the TV series, where even in like the kind of the episode 1 of DBZ that has a lot of the extra scenes with Gohan in the middle, it's not that extended a period of just her going back and forth, Goku and Gohan. That woman is a fucking international treasure. Protect her at all costs. Yeah,
it definitely is a excellent showcase for Nozawa's voice acting, because you get a lot of like Gohan or Goku talking to themselves when you're just flying around in the open world, and like the degree to which she is able to modulate her voice for every different age of Gohan and Goku, and are they Super Saiyan or not Super Saiyan, like even with like no additional context in the scene, it's just like them muttering to themselves something about some collectible or something in the open world, and still like you could close your eyes and still I could tell you, oh, this is Gohan in like at the Cell Games saga, when he's like in his sort of constant Super Saiyan mode, or oh, this is Gohan in the Namek arc with his bowl cut, because it's like the levels at which she kind of has like built out the voice for each era of that character in particular is really remarkable.
It is. I mean, we always, the thing everyone says is like, there's so many characters. It's all three of Goku's, Goku and his two children, but it is also Goku's dad, Bardock, and it is the evil Gokus. But like, then all of those characters also have multiple modes, you know? Like, Bardock from the TV special where he's evil doesn't sound quite like Bardock from Dragon Ball Super Broly, where he's more neutral, and then you have all the ages. It's crazy. This could very quickly become a Masuko Nozawa appreciation podcast if we wanted it to be. And maybe at some point it should be. We should just start that show. Masuko Nozawa Station.
I will say it still kind of like it gave me chills when you get to the end of the Frieza stuff and you turn into Super Saiyan for the first time, and like the contrast in the voice, it's so good. It's so powerful. That like how much she sells what the idea of Super Saiyan is by the way she plays the character, and because you've just gone through a huge, I mean, it's like half the game, because they definitely go into more detail with the Saiyan and Namek arcs than they do the Cell and the Buu stuff. They do a good job with the Cell and the Buu stuff, but you can feel that they kind of put their back in mostly in that section of the story. And so you play a lot of the game getting up to Super Saiyan, and then once that shift happens in Goku, it's very intense.
Absolutely. Yeah, she rocks. One other stuff thing I've been doing, Sean, just while we're talking about Toriyama stuff, I watched the first 6 episodes of the Sandland anime last night that are now on Hulu or I think Disney Plus internationally. Have you watched this yet, Sean?
No, I have not watched it yet.
Okay, so Sandland, for those who don't know, that's a manga Toriyama wrote. It's the first full manga I think he did after Dragon Ball. It's a single volume, like 15-issue manga he did in Weekly Shonen Jump, and that was from like the year 2000, but now there is an anime. There was a movie last year in Japan that we didn't get yet. The TV show is the movie cut up into 6 episodes, and then there's an additional 7 that are releasing weekly from this point on that are a new arc that Toriyama did outline for the anime staff. So it's like a sequel to the manga that he helped write for the anime version. And 1 episode of that arc is out. I have not watched that yet. But last night I just did all 6 episodes that are the movie. And it's awesome. It's so good. Like, I had not read Sandland since I was a kid, and I like checked it out from the library. So I did not remember the story super well, but it's brilliant. I mean, it's very funny and sweet and warm and creative and all those things you expect from Toriyama. It is also a little darker and deeper. Like, it broaches on some real world, like, political issues. It's like a pretty, blatant ecological anti-capitalist narrative. I think it's extremely finger on the pulse for, like, the entire 21st century moment of climate crisis and the role of, like, robber baron Koch brother motherfuckers in the world right now. And it's cathartic on that level. It deals with characters who have some like very intense guilt. And then also some of the characters are these, cool demon boys who are very funny and do silly things. And it's a great story. The anime is really, really accomplished. It is drawn in the same style as Dragon Ball Super Superhero, basically, where it is a sort of 3D anime done in CGI, but meant to look like 2D drawings come to life, right? And actually it's even more like something like Land of the Lustrous or the Orange shows, where the backgrounds are all completely hand-drawn. So it's hand-drawn backgrounds and then CGI characters and vehicles and stuff like that. And I think it has the same strengths and weaknesses Superhero did, where I think they're able to bring out certain sides of Toriyama's manga art in really unique, beautiful ways, and it certainly serves the material pretty well. And then it has some of the same limitations where there's like a lot of kind of aliasing in the production. Superhero had this as well, that you notice particularly on the most complex objects when they are far in the distance. But overall, it's not that much of a distraction. I think it looks really lovely. Particularly the stuff, a lot of the series takes place in a big tank that I believe Toriyama, I don't know if this was serious or not, but he has joked is the reason the series is short is because the tank was too hard to draw. And I understand why. It is a very elaborate tank. But the tanks look very good, I think, in 3D, and were probably easier to animate that way. This was one of the studios that did this, the lead studio on this was Sunrise. So you can feel a little bit maybe of that, Gundam, the Origin feeling in there with some of the CGI work. But it's beautifully done that way. It's got a great score by Yugo Kanno, who Gundam fans will know as the composer for G-Reco. Really enjoyed the score for it. It's jazzy in some places. It's dramatic in other places. The core voice cast is just tremendous. Beelzebub, the main demon character, is voiced by Mutsumi Tamura, who I know we'll be seeing in Japanimation Station soon because she plays Miss Kobayashi in Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. Okay. And she's really good as Beelzebub. Just a perfect kind of Toriyama hero voice in a way that I really enjoyed hearing. Rao is Kazuhiro Yamaji, who is an actor he's very much like an anime character actor when you see him. He doesn't play a lot of lead roles, but I always like him when he shows up in things. And this is just such a great showcase. He's got this very like gritty old man voice that has always served him well. I remember he's in Attack on Titan as Kenny Ackerman, and when that character showed up, I remember having to stop and look up like, who is this guy? This is great. And I enjoyed hearing him in kind of a lead role here, and he's great. And then Cho, who people will know as Brook from One Piece, is Thief, the last of the main three characters. And that's also a really delightful performance. It's kind of Brook if he was a kind of silly old man, and it's really fun to hear that. So love all of those main characters. There's other good voices throughout here. There's a little Akio Otsuka cameo as Beelzebub's father, who is Lucifer, or, well, they call him Lucifer in the subtitles. He is just Satan in Japanese. And I guess they wanted to protect us, Americans from a character named Satan. But Akio Otsuka is Satan. That's great. Hope we get more of that character in the next 7 episodes somewhere. But anyway, it's a really cool show. If you were worried at all about the thing where they take a movie and then cut it up into a TV show, it's so seamless. I kind of wonder if it started life as a TV show and then became a movie and then became a TV show again, because like the 6 episodes are really perfectly cut up as 6 episodes of TV and play really well that way. I watched them all in one sitting, but you would not have to. They play really well just as a kind of episodic, serialized sort of thing. It's got a great theme song. It's a complete package. It's a great way to celebrate Toriyama. And then it's like we immediately get a sequel story within the anime itself with these next 7 episodes that are coming, which is another new story from Akira Toriyama. What a treat. It's such a cool thing that it exists. I love it.
Yeah, I'll definitely, I'm just waiting for it to be done to check it out. But yeah, I'm very excited for it because you also have the game that's coming out, and just looking at the trailer for the game and then the trailer for the show, it's clear that a lot of stuff in that second half, like there are characters in the trailer that are from the second half of the show that are also in the trailer for the game. So clearly, this is a true, multimedia thing where you don't actually get that often with games these days, where you have here is a sort of filmed media thing that is still in production or is currently releasing, and here is a game and they actually come out at the same time and they're actually related. That used to happen, but there were lots of reasons why that did not work most of the time on the game side. But it's kind of cool to see that and be like, okay, cool. If you watch the show and really like the show, probably that game will be something you'd want to check out.
The game, I did play the demo last night for a little bit after finishing the show, or the 6 episode, first arc. And that game looks stunning. Like, it is real. It is 4K, 60 FPS. Like, it is so sharp, Sean. I think in some ways the character models look better than in the show. Like, there's less aliasing and things like that. They resolve cleaner. And it is such a dead ringer going from the TV show to the game. Part of this is also the TV show is on Hulu and the streaming quality is and the game is running in really pristine quality on the PS5. But yeah, I'm excited to play that game. The gameplay seemed pretty cool. It's one of those demos that kind of just drops you in a setting where it gives you some of the materials and it's just play around in this area. So it's not like a demo where you start from the beginning and see the whole context. So I didn't get a great feeling for what the gameplay is like, but boy, does it nail the look of the series in a great way. One bone to pick. I really fucking hate it when anime comes out on a platform that isn't Crunchyroll or Netflix, the platforms that know what they're doing with anime, because Hulu's presentation is annoying. It starts and it's in Japanese, which is great. That's what I want to hear. But no subtitles, so you have to go in, and the only subtitles are the closed captions. So in addition to all the translations, you have to get all the character grunts. Thief talks here, all of that stuff. The captions are big and have the fucking gray bars over the image. And on all 6 episodes, the captions gradually fell out of sync for me over the course of the episode until they were a character would say about half their line before the subtitle would come up. Just, what are we doing? And I also think it's weird. There is a dub cast that is in the game, but there is no dub for the show. And I wouldn't watch the dub, but I'm just saying, because I love the Japanese actors and all that stuff, and I don't usually watch dubs. I have nothing against it, though. This seems like the kind of anime you would want to put out dubbed and maybe put a marketing budget behind with the "from the creator of Dragon Ball" line on it, and it's just had a completely quiet in the background release from Hulu and Disney, and I don't get that. It's very baffling to me why you wouldn't put a good marketing budget behind this thing.
Yeah, it's frustrating because, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't, like, everywhere else in the world just gets this on Disney Plus, right? Because Hulu's not really, like, an international thing. And so
it's because everything on Hulu goes on a tab of Disney Plus called Star internationally, but here in the US, they are still separate. So most things are only on one or the other. And I believe, in this case, it's only on Hulu.
And Disney Plus is a much better service in terms of its streaming, its interface, like all that kind of stuff. Like I've never had, like when I watched Star Wars Visions, for instance, which obviously that was the anime project, which I watched that in Japanese with English subtitles, like no problems. Like it worked totally fine, the way you would expect. And when I watched things like Obi-Wan, I did go and like watch certain scenes in different dubs because it was super easy to do with their player, and it was cool to see like, oh, hey, here's some, like, I forget who it is, but like some of like the really famous like anime actors playing these different characters who have been them in the dubs forever. It's like, oh, that's cool to see. And then I'm curious what Obi-Wan sounds like in French or whatever. And that player is really good. And it's just very frustrating whenever I see this, like, oh, this thing's going to be on Disney Plus. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Maybe I'll re-up my Disney Plus subscription next month or something. And it says, oh no, it's on Disney Plus everywhere else. If you want to watch it here, it's Hulu. Oh, well, I'm not going to do that because I fucking hate Hulu. I hate it.
Hulu is a terrible platform. It's got good stuff. It's got Hulu has a bunch of great stuff. It has all of FX, and FX is one of the best networks. But like, as a platform, it's garbage. Disney Plus, I don't know how. They're owned by the same company. I don't know how they're so different. Disney Plus is the best streaming platform in terms of, I think, UI, the usability, video quality, all of that is kind of flawless because it's the newest one that was like made, really. Yeah. Like everything else, like Max is built off the bones of HBO Go from 15 years ago. Paramount Plus is built off the bones of CBS All Access. Disney Plus is the only one that was like engineered in the 2020s. At some point this year, Hulu and Disney are supposed to be combining here in the US, so hopefully, fingers crossed, we eventually get the better version of that. But in terms of Sandland, I might just sail the high seas for that one and find a better torrent version. I don't know. There you go.
Yeah, Hulu's no good.
Hulu's no good. But, it has Sandland, and Sandland is good, so that's nice. Sean, should I tell the kids about my adventures in the fine city of Boston?
Yes, I'm curious. Like, how did Boston go for you? Did you have a good time? Did you get, hear like lots of funny people say car in a funny way? I assume that's just what people go do in Boston is they hear the accent and they get like clam chowder or something.
I did get clam chowder at two separate places. I took a lot of Ubers and Lyfts while I was there, and I only had one driver who was like a native Bostonian who talked like a Mark Wahlberg character, and I did like that guy a lot. That was fun to hear him just, talk about Boston in his thick accent, and that was fun. In terms of Boston stereotypes, there truly is a Dunkin' Donuts everywhere you turn in Boston. It's like a Starbucks in Seattle or something. Just you cannot, if you are ever in need of somewhere to go get food or drink, there will be a Dunkin' in sight. They are everywhere. It was kind of funny just how true that was. No, it was a real whirlwind trip. I was going for a conference, SCMS, which is the big conference in film studies and communications, and the big one. It's thousands of people. It's enormous. They hold it at like the biggest hotel in the city wherever they go. So this one, it was held at the Sheraton downtown. I couldn't get a room there because it was too expensive and they sold out. So I was a little further away down near Boston Harbor. But anyway, I only went for the conference for 2 days. It was being held for 4, but I needed to get back sooner. And it would have cost more to do that anyway. It was very expensive. So it was kind of a whirlwind trip. The other thing is, nowhere in the state of Iowa, we have a couple of airports. None of them fly to Boston. So flights from Iowa to Boston were in the, I'm not kidding, $700 round trip range. Couldn't afford that. So I had to drive to Chicago, where there are direct flights to Boston that were in the like $100 round trip range, you know? So my travel involved driving 4 hours to Chicago, finding a lot where I could park, where there was a shuttle to the airport, getting to the airport, flying to Boston, Boston to my hotel, and then doing that again 2.5 days later, back in the morning, starting at 4 a.m. because my flight was at 6. So anyway, it was sandwiched between 2 very intense days of travel, and then I basically had Wednesday night and all of Thursday and Friday in Boston, and it was a good little trip, you know. I got to see some good stuff. The conference was fine. I was chairing a panel, and I gave a talk on tactility in animation. You can actually see that talk. It is up on Vimeo. You can see it linked on jonathanlack.com. It's a recent article there if you want to find the link. I tried to put it on YouTube where I put all my other stuff, but it has 2 short clips from Ghibli movies in there, and Studio Ghibli in Japan themselves copyright struck my video. And I learned how to use the appeals system on YouTube to go like, this is the most obvious case of fair use, guys. This is me giving an educational talk with some clips, and there's no sound. It's me talking over the clips. I pulled the sound out to eliminate all of that. So anyway, but that appeals process can take 30 days. So in the meantime, it's on Vimeo. You can watch it there if you want to see my talk. So I did that. And then, yeah, I did some touristy stuff in Boston. I got to go to the big one I wanted to do because it was near my hotel and I thought it sounded fun and funny, was the Boston Tea Party Museum, which is down in Boston Harbor, and they have a museum, and then they also have some replicas of the ships that the Patriots dumped the tea from. And there's a fun little 1 hour guided tour with all of your tour guides in character as, people from, 1700s Boston, and it's very silly. I will say it's a very self-aware version of that concept, and so I kind of enjoyed the wink, wink, nudge, nudge of it all. There was a lot of, joking about everyone being a traitor to the crown, and that was good. And, it definitely felt patriotic. That's the cool part of American history, where we were sticking it to the British by dunking all their tea in the water. That's great. That's the part of America I am proud to be a part of.
Yeah, fuck the Brits and fuck their tea.
Absolutely.
You don't need that shit.
No taxation without representation, motherfuckers. So that was good.
Yeah, except for, for the slaves that we own. It's fine. Yeah. But for the British, fuck those guys.
No, we're horrible hypocrites, but, at least we stuck it to the British a little bit. That was nice. And, it's a fun little museum tour. There's a movie at the end on, an ultra-wide screen. They have, a big wraparound theater display where you watch this, 10-minute movie about Paul Revere's ride after the Boston Tea Party that leads to, the shot heard around the world and all of that stuff. So that was good. And then the one of the rooms in the museum, they have the last surviving crate of tea that was used in the Boston Tea Party, and you can get to see that, and it has drawings all over it, because at some point in the 250 years and change since that happened, one of it's the descendants who grabbed the basket, gave it to their daughter as a dollhouse and all this stuff, so that was kind of funny. There's one vial of brewed tea from the Boston Tea Party that still survives. No one has drunk that yet, which is probably good. I'm imagining it would kill you since it is 250 plus years old.
Yeah,
so that's fun.
Organic. So there's something foul. That should be its own movie. Is an evil monster. It's fucking a bacteria monster comes out and Godzilla has to fight it or some shit.
It is. I mean, it's in the middle of a room on they won't let you take pictures in that specific room. And it's on a pedestal in a glass case with a light on it, but the lights are down in the rest of the room. And it does look like Nicolas Cage is going to break in here and steal that because there's some secret in there that will lead him to buried treasure.
Yeah. I do have to say, I appreciate, their dedication to preserving history, but it feels like the rock star thing to do would be to go dump that shit in Boston Harbor and say, no, we got to finish what we started, fuck the British, and go throw this crate and dump this fucking rancid old ancient cup of tea in the Boston Harbor and kill all the fish in there. Because it's what we're doing, we've left this undone, unfinished for over 200 years.
That sounds like a good plot for a movie. Finishing the Boston Tea Party. I like it. No, anyway, I did that. Let's see. On Friday, I went to the aquarium, the New England Aquarium. I like visiting aquariums. Aquariums are cool. The New England Aquarium is super cool. It's like 5 stories tall and built around this central tank in the middle that has 200,000 gallons of water and like 500 species of fish. And it's got 3 giant sea turtles who are all older than you or I am, because sea turtles are old. One of the sea turtles has been there since the building was built in the 1970s, and he was already like 30 years old. So that turtle is older than anyone who works in that. That's just awesome. I like that the turtle is the oldest thing in that building. It's got a big coral reef. You get to see some, all sorts of fish and sharks, and there's jellyfish in other tanks. So that was cool. I like visiting places like aquariums. Let's see, what else did I do? Oh, on Thursday night, I did avail myself of, there are no IMAXs near me in Iowa, but there are some nice IMAXs over in Boston, so I did go see Dune Part 2 on IMAX the way it was meant to be seen. It was not a full, real 143:1 super tall film IMAX, but it was the nicest digital IMAX I've ever seen. Really big screen. It was a laser projector, one of the best digital projections of anything I've ever seen, and that was cool because that movie is great, and it was cool to see in that venue.
Awesome.
Yeah. Did you see Dune Part 2 yet? I'm curious.
No, I haven't. I meant to go see it over spring break, but I got distracted by other stuff.
Yeah, mostly Yacht Like a Dragon, I'm guessing?
Yes, yeah. It's like I was on a death march to be like, I gotta finish this game, because if I don't finish it during spring break, I'm never going to be able to finish it.
Yes. Well, if you want to hear my thoughts on Dune 2, I did write a review on jonathanlight.com. You can hear that, and the IMAX version is good too. It's the rare IMAX version of a film that I actually think kind of does it right, in that it has no aspect ratio shifting. They actually shot the whole thing. It's digital, but they did shoot the whole thing. Other than there's like a dozen shots where people are looking through scopes, like binoculars, and those are kept at 239:1. But that makes sense because it's all about a narrow scope of vision. You don't even really notice it. So it's a very full, frame IMAX experience for the entire thing, and it was really cool to see. So I was happy about that. Got to go to some other panels at the conference, and then came back home. And it was a whirlwind trip that I feel like I'm still recovering from because I was so fucking tired by the time I got home.
Did you have any incredibly insane bonkers car shit that happened? Because I feel like every time you go on a trip, your car explodes. Yep. There's a giant accident. Not like you're in it, but like that you go past. You encounter some sort of Final Destination-esque nightmare scenario. Anything like that this time?
No, honestly, the travel, and surely karma is building up to something here with me, but it was pretty smooth. It was obnoxious, the amount of travel I had to do, driving 4 hours to the airport and all of that stuff. But no, it was totally smooth. Didn't get, last time I was in Illinois, I got a ticket and then had to drive back to Illinois to defend it. That was fucking annoying. Didn't have that this time. Didn't have any issues with the flights were fine. Everything was fine. It was surprisingly frictionless travel experience. I even got to go through one of the TSA lines where they don't make you take your electronics out because they just built a better machine that can see through the bags. That's nice. They should implement that everywhere. It went a lot faster when you didn't have to have 3 different bins for your computer and shit. So that was nice. Anyway, yeah. So no, my travel was fine. It was good.
Awesome.
I had a little bit of good food. I had a shrimp, what do they call it? Shrimp roll? No, not shrimp roll. Lobster roll. All the Bostonians are mad at me right now. It was very expensive, but it was good. I'm glad I tried it. There was some good clam chowder. And I did find, this was great, there is a taiyaki restaurant. That is the, fish sandwiches that, not made of fish, but they are breading that looks like fish, that in the show Kanon, which we reviewed on Japanimation Station, the main character of that is always eating taiyaki. And they have one of those that is taiyaki, and it's you can get it with either a red bean filling. I got the red bean filling. I forget, there was another kind, but it wasn't as authentic. I got the red bean filling. Red bean is delicious. And then there was ice cream in that, and then there were different toppings, including mochi. So we had just recorded our episode on Tamako Market, and I got to have some mochi with my taiyaki, and I was very happy about that, because Tamako Market is all about mochi. So that was cool. It was a nice, apparently it's a chain that is in New York that is pretty authentic, but there's one in Boston, so that was cool to see.
Did you go ugu after you took a bite out of it?
I was eating it outside at 9 p.m. in the cold because I was on my way back to my hotel when I saw this place, and I was not quite in an ugu mood, but I would have been totally alone just in the middle of this street at 9 p.m. with my breath freezing out of my mouth going ugu. It would have been very weird.
I would like to think that you start just going ooh, and then like, you know, some like 16-year-old girl who's like manning the cash register or whatever, it's like manager, this guy just keeps on going ooh. The manager's just like this old dude with like a big beard and like very intensely, he's like, yes, he is our most discerning customer we've had in years. Because he knows, the manager knows, he knows what's up with the ooh.
All right. Any other stuff before we move on to news and video games and all that good stuff?
No, I've you know, in terms of like anime stuff, it's been mostly Japanimation Station. I have started, because it finally, the like biggest feeling season of anime in forever is finally over, so I can start watching through these shows, because there's like 5 or 6 shows that just finished airing that were all on my kind of like must watch list. So I have started watching So no Frieren. So I'm about 5 episodes into that show, which has a tremendous reputation. It's like, you know, it's obviously this is like a recency bias thing also, but on all like the anime rating websites, it's number 1 now. It has officially dethroned Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood as the greatest anime ever made. You know, I'm 5 episodes in. I can't determine if it's the greatest anime ever made. It is very good, and its reputation is generally quite well deserved, because yeah, just the first episode alone is fucking incredible. And it's I think the highest compliment I can give it. It's the first anime I've watched since starting Japanimation Station Kyoto Vacation that I have not had whiplash going between that and whatever Kyoani show I'm watching in terms of production value. Because normally I'm watching something and then I'm like, okay, yeah, let me go now do my Japanimation Station show. And I'm like, oh, holy shit. Like, holy shit, Kyoani is like on a whole different other dimension. Not this time around. It's the same director that did Bocchi the Rock. Which is notable to me. This very different kind of genre. You know, this is fantasy, but it has the same level of kind of attention to detail that show had. Less comedy, but it still just has like the characters are so lived in, and that's what Bocchi had in terms of its animation as well. The music is by Evan Call, which is incredible, which is exciting because that is the same guy who did the music on Violet Evergarden, so we will get to that. And the music is just absolutely gorgeous. The voice acting is incredible, top to bottom. Just a phenomenal cast. They let Nobuhiko Okamoto, who plays one of the major characters, Himmel, who's like the hero who defeated the Demon King. Okamoto is the guy who, like, in every anime is always the, like, screaming asshole character. Like, he's Bakugo in My Hero Academia. He just, like, if you hear him, he has, like, the most snarly fucking voice on those characters. And they finally cast him as someone who's, like, gentle and kind and compassionate. I'm like, oh, he's really good. Like, oh my god, like, finally someone is like, let's cast this dude as, like, a character that's some emotion other than angry. And I very much appreciated that. So I'm very excited to continue watching through the show, because it's also got a good sense of pace to it, because I've only been watching like a couple of episodes a day, because it's got that kind of episodic feel. Like, really, I think it's a show I would have been fine just watching week to week, really, while it was airing, because it feels each episode feels very complete and thoughtful and like kind of fully fleshed out, which not a lot of anime have that quality to it. So yeah, Frieren, very, very good. If people have not checked it out, it's now finished, so you can start watching it and watch it at your own pace if you want.
Yeah, I've been, that one has been on my list as well, and I'm excited to see it. What are the other ones from this season that you're waiting for? I know Solo Leveling is one.
Yes.
Which is
the Apothecary Diaries is the other really big one. That one I feel like, I don't know, it didn't feel like it got as much buzz over here, but I know in Japan it's just like fucking huge. Because I think it's kind of like a Imperial Court era mystery story, which sounds awesome. I know it's got a second season that's been announced already, but that's going to come out later. So I'm just going to go ahead and watch what's aired so far. I feel like
the first season is already 2 course, so that's a pretty long one.
Yes,
also.
So it's a good chunk of anime to watch. I feel like there were a couple of others, but I'm blanking off the top of my head what they were. But because there's some other smaller stuff also that came out that's not necessarily the like, here's the sort of like, best rated show of all time, but are just like something nice to watch through. So I'm excited to start picking through all that stuff.
Speaking of nice, gentle shows that are fun to watch through, I did finally finish all of Attack on Titan because I was on a plane, and I don't know if I've talked about this before, but like I've watched the majority of Attack on Titan on planes. I had like a series of flights back in 2022, and I just downloaded it on Crunchyroll on my phone, and I just watched, because Attack on Titan is so propulsive. Like, I remember there was one flight, I think, to New Orleans, where I watched the entire first cour of Attack on Titan in one sitting on the plane, which, if you know the first cour of Attack on Titan, it's extraordinarily fucking intense, nonstop. And then I think all of season 2 I did on the flight back. Anyway, so I did watch the Mappa had the final 2 specials last year, where it's the fucking weirdest release for an anime ever, but they did a 1 hour special and a 90-minute special to finish that series off, and I watched both of those, one on a flight and then one when I got home, and it's very good. They did a good job on the ending. Won't say more than that, but I did enjoy seeing that series finished.
Yes, now I need to get around to watching it again, because I only ever saw that first season, and then I have waited a very long time for it. I mean,
took
really,
10 years.
I would have picked it up along the way, but it's just, it kind of felt like that show always aired when there was a lot of other big things I wanted to watch came out, and so I never really ended up picking it back up.
But it is finally done. Went through a lot of hands, went through a lot of seasons, went through 3.5 final seasons. It was great. It's finally over.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it's an example of like one of the reasons why so many series in terms of like light novel and manga series that get anime adaptations just never get all the way through it, because it's a titanic effort over the course of a long number of years to actually create that much animation. Especially when we're no longer in the era of like the style of productions that would give you 52 episode a year kind of runs. It is definitely, it's a titanic effort to make a complete adaptation like that. So it's cool that Attack on Titan made it over the finish line, because there are lots of things that have not done that.
Yes, luckily that show is, ludicrously popular, so it would have been weird if it didn't, but yes, good stuff. So anyway, do you want to move on and talk about the kind of one news item I want to go into this week?
Actually, there's one other thing. I realized I've been wanting to talk about this on the podcast for like a month, but I just keep on forgetting to bring it up. Just bring it up briefly. I do want to give a quick update on my Ultraman adventures.
Yay, go for it.
Continuing to watch Ultraman shows. I'm now on and almost finished with Ultraman Leo, which I'm excited about and also sad about, because this is the last one shot on film. This was in 1974, because you go Ultra Q, Ultraman, Ultra 7, Return of Ultraman, Ultraman Ace, Ultraman Taro, and then Ultraman Leo. So this is the 7th one if you count Ultra Q. So I've watched a lot of Ultraman over the past like 5 years. This is the last one that's on a Blu-ray because it's the last one on film. Everything else past this point, until we get to the modern stuff, is all, standard def and stuff like that. But
so shot on video, like Doctor Who or something.
Mm-hmm, yeah. But Ultraman Leo might be my favorite one. It's incredibly good. It's a really cool show because it comes out in 1974, right when Bruce Lee has gotten really big. Well, also he's passed away, but most of Bruce Lee's
it happened
movies,
very fast.
Most of Bruce Lee's movies released posthumously because he died very suddenly, and a lot of his movies were still like finishing production or were in post production when he passed away. So it's like Enter the Dragon comes out, it gets super popular in America, but also in Japan. And so you see so distinctively the influence of Bruce Lee on this show. They cast the main character. The guy they cast looks a lot like Bruce Lee. Like, there's a lot of karate stuff, which makes a lot of the fights really good because there's a more of an emphasis on striking. And so it has like a little bit less of like the pro wrestling grappling stuff, and it kind of mixes it up a bit. But the thing about Ultraman Leo that's really cool is that the setup of the show is very different, where you have the new Ultraman Leo. He does not come from the same planet as the other Ultramans, the Land of Light. He comes from the Leo constellation or whatever. But he's still an Ultraman-looking dude. I don't know what the deal with that is. I don't know if there's just like, hey, there's lots of human-looking aliens in sci-fi. There's just Ultraman-looking aliens that aren't technically Ultramans. I don't know how the biology of Ultramans work. But he's not from the Land of Light. His constellation got destroyed by an evil alien, and he sought refuge on Earth. And that's where he ends up getting recruited by Moriboshi Dan, who is Ultra 7. So the main character from Ultra 7, which is one of the best Ultraman shows, it was the second one, the original sequel to Ultraman. They brought the actor back and everything, and now he is the leader of the like monster strike force. Basically, every Ultraman show has a group of humans that have their like headquarters, and they go and they like pointlessly shoot tanks and shit at the monster that are never going to do anything until Ultraman shows up to win the day. But it's just a staple of the shows. And it's kind of like having like Amuro become Captain Bright or something in a Gundam context, where you have your protagonist of the previous show is now the captain, and it's fucking cool. But the other thing, the reason why he's a captain and not being Ultra 7 to fight the monsters is because in the first episode, he gets jumped by like 3 monsters and Ultra 7 gets his fucking leg broken, like brutally and like violently on screen. And it's incredibly fucked up. And it sets the tone for Ultraman Leo, which is by far and away the darkest Ultraman show, particularly in the first like 20 episodes or so before they start to kind of shift the tone a little bit back to sort of like the more standard Ultraman thing, because it probably was legitimately maybe too dark, certainly for, it's not a children's show. People get killed. There's like blood. Like it is pretty fucking violent. And Ultra 7 gets his leg broken, so he has to train Ultraman Leo and bring him up to be like, you got to now be like the Ultraman that's going to protect Earth, because I can't do it because my leg is fucking broken. I've got a cane and all this stuff. And so a lot of Ultraman Leo is like Leo fighting a monster that's shown up, losing, and then him getting trained by Dan / Ultra 7 and him having to come up with a strategy to go fight the monster, which is just a really good structure that gives it this kind of martial arts master apprentice vibe that is just phenomenal. And it's got shades of Gundam in there. Like you can really see how this show leads into like the different trends that lead into the sort of real robot and the kind of darker anime trend you get in the late 70s, of which Gundam is like at the vanguard of. Because one of the reasons why this is the last filmed Ultraman show is because after 74, these kinds of shows start losing their popularity, because anime starts becoming the more dominant children's entertainment form in Japan in the late 70s. This is the exact same reason why Godzilla takes a break around that exact same time, and there's a huge jump between Terror of Mechagodzilla to when you get Return of Godzilla in 1984. So it's sort of, you see this shift in narrative trends and styles, and it's a more dramatic show. There's more narrative continuity between episodes. There's a lot more investment in having these kind of 2 lead characters, and Dan has as much development as a character as Ultraman Leo / Gin, which is what his human name is. And then this show does the same thing that Return of Ultraman did, where you get about 3/4 of the way through the show, and you get to the point where in the production you would begin your 4th core. And at that point, they decided, let's do a huge status quo shift. And there's an episode that I can only describe as being basically like the beginning of the Transformers movie, where they just kill basically every single supporting character in about 10 minutes. Dan / Ultra 7 is not necessarily killed, but he's kind of taken out of action, and he sort of says, like, again, Ultraman Leo, like, you're Ultraman Leo now, like, you have to do it, you have to stand on your own, you have to fight the monsters that defend Earth. The entire rest of the Earth Defense Force or whatever are completely wiped out. It's left ambiguous if they're dead or not, but their, like, satellite base gets destroyed by an alien saucer. All the peoples are either missing or dead. And then the, like, normal human family that Gin has been living with, the, like, sister and then this little girl, both of them die. And so it's just him and this young boy character that's been since the beginning of the show. They're the only characters of the entire supporting cast / main cast that survive, and they move to the countryside to start living with another family, and then the flying saucer. And so Gin has to, like, go fight the aliens in secret now with no support, no military backup, no whatever. And there's this evil dude with a cool black cape and a hat and a cool fortune-telling ball who keeps on sending, like, flying saucer monsters from the Death Star, or whatever the fuck it's called, to go kill Ultraman Leo. And it's incredibly hardcore. Like, again, there is a, like, 8-year-old girl character that you don't see her die, but she's definitively dead. They make a point of it, of, like, her name. You see a list of all the names of the people who have died in this massive disaster on Earth caused by the alien invasion, and it stops and shows you her name, and then it puts her face over it in, like, you know, like a ghostly thing with her smiling, and then you see Gin crying. And it's like, this is the most hard fucking core children's show I have seen my entire life. Because Ultraman, Return of Ultraman, did kill the main character's girlfriend and father figure and had the aliens murder them and leave their bodies out on the fucking road, which is pretty hardcore, but they didn't kill a literal child, and it's fucking awesome.
Sean Chapman, pro killing children. No, I'm kidding. Just in awesome tokusatsu shows. Yeah, this sounds... I really want to watch this. This sounds fucking great. So this one is like you're saying a direct follow-up to Ultra 7 because that character comes back and is the mentor?
You don't need to have watched Ultra 7 anyway, right? Because all it is he is like an older Ultraman who has been injured, and so he sort of takes the new Ultraman under his wing. There's like no meaningful... outside, there's one episode where they bring back one other character from Ultra 7, but you also, they kind of do a totally different thing with that character. You do not have to have seen that show.
But I know Ultra 7 is also a beloved one, so that's cool that there's that connection. Because before this one, that was the one you said was your favorite.
Yes, because I think for me, it's like this and Ultra 7 are definitely at the top. Under that would be Return of Ultraman, and then under that would be Original Ultraman. And then I would say Ace and Taro are both fine, but they're very kind of whatever Ultraman shows. They don't have like something that really stands out to them. Like Return of Ultraman has the best monster fights. Original Ultraman just is like very inventive. Ultra 7 has the best episodic plots because it's got a lot more of a sci-fi thing. Ultraman Leo has the best character stuff because it's like the characters feel very rich. But one other point I also want to make, because this blew my mind, is after they killed the little girl character, who was in every episode. Like, to be clear, she was a main supporting character who was in every single episode up to that point. So it's not like a girl you saw every once in a while. Like, they killed off a main character with this little girl, along with every other main character, basically. But then I looked it up because I was like, did they really kill off this girl? And it says, yep, like, she's not in any of the other episodes. But then I noticed the name, and I was like, I feel like I recognize the name of this actress. And then I looked her up, and it's Tominaga Yoshiko. This is the first thing she was ever in. She is a voice actress now, is what people think of her as. And she is a very famous voice actress because she is one of the main characters in the most recent cast of Sazai-san. She's Katsuo. So, that's like a national treasure show in Japan. She is the main character, Noah, in Pat Labor. So the girl with like the red hair in the Pat Labor series, that's this voice actress. She is Myojin Yahiko, who's one of the main characters of Rurouni Kenshin. She's one of the main characters, Nanao, in Maison Ikkoku. She's in just like a huge number of classic shows as a voice actress. But like the big thing she got her start in acting was she is the little girl who's one of the main characters in Ultraman Leo who gets killed in episode 40. And it's like, what a crazy fucking career that is.
That is insane, but that's awesome. No, I love her, especially in Pat Labor. That's one of my favorite characters. Yes. So that's really cool. Yeah.
Ultraman
I love
Leo.
Whenever you talk about Ultraman. Yeah. So
Ultraman Leo, hardcore as shit. I already bought Ultraman 80 and Ultraman Tiga on DVD because that's where we're going next. I don't know if I will be as into the later Ultraman shows because obviously after this point is you're getting out of the Showa era stuff, and so I'm curious to see the style change because I know eventually we'll hit the point where all the Ultraman, like human people, like the human form of the Ultraman character, they're going to be like 18-year-old boy band looking motherfuckers. And I don't know if I'll be as into that. I like when they're like a 30-year-old guy. I like when they look like me. I want a middle-aged Japanese man to be Ultraman. That's like what I want. I want people in my age range to be the dude who transforms, becomes a superhero, eventually becomes their like hot teenagers. And I don't know if I'll be as into that, but at least Ultraman Leo is still kicking ass. I've still got like 10 episodes to finish it up, so.
Nice. Awesome. Well, I'm always excited to hear more about Ultraman. I get to hear you talk about both Ultraman and Yakuza today, and those are like my favorite Sean segments that recur on this show, is you talking about those different things. So this is a good one for me. All right. Now, this is the third time I'm trying this transition. Yes. Can we go to the news?
Now, Jonathan, what's happening in the news?
Not a ton in our neck of the worlds, I feel like, but I did. So we've known that this was coming for a while, PlayStation's Project Trinity, but it got some pretty heavy leaks, enough that like places like Digital Foundry were doing breakdowns of what looks to be the PS5 Pro launching probably this fall. And And it's fascinating to talk about. I think the overall reaction, and I was kind of surprised to watch Digital Foundry's breakdown, because even for them, I would say the overall reaction was slight exasperation of a little bit of like, what are we doing here? Because that was even kind of the theme of, there was some like, just as tech nerds excitement for it, but even in the Digital Foundry video, there was a lot of kind of trying to figure out how and why Sony's going to frame this. Because overall, what we're seeing from the leaks is that this is going to be a extremely modest CPU boost. So you're not going to see real CPU gains. With a much bigger GPU boost to ray tracing power, an attempt to get the resolutions and image quality up of games, more, software for image reconstruction, PlayStation having their own proprietary version of basically AMD's upscaling technology, some of that stuff. And I guess I'll just say my overall frustration is, one, I don't really like the mid-console refreshes anyway. Two, the PS5 is a weird beast because we're only, in the last year, have been really getting new games. So it feels, I think for everyone, even though this is year 4 of the system, I don't think people are wrong to feel like this is sudden and jarring. And finally, this will be the 3rd successive Sony console, PS4 Pro, PS5, PS5 Pro, that seemingly will be marketed on the, no, this time it really is 4K, we promise. And I do wonder how many times you can do that before people go, I never cared in the first place. So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah. I think I'm more interested in it than you, Jonathan. There have been a few games, I feel like, of the past couple of years where it has felt like the shift to UE5, Unreal Engine 5, and stuff like that has caused there to be a pretty substantial hit in terms of the raw image quality, right? When you're talking about like the rendering resolution and then what they're trying to do to upscale it, I think for both the Series X and the PS5, they have clearly hit a bit of a wall in terms of how developers are using these consoles, where they're making huge compromises in terms of the rendering resolution and using AMD's FSR2 upscaling methodology, which is what they have to do because the main on-market like upscaling methodologies in the PC space that are really, really good are DLSS and XESS, NVIDIA's DLSS and Intel's XESS. Those, however, are more hardware-based solutions. These consoles can't use those, so they're using the more software-based FSR2 from AMD. And because they're starting with really low internal resolutions, then trying to bump those up to 1440p or 4K or whatever target they're trying to get it up to, you end up with these very grimy looking games in terms of their raw image quality. And so for me personally, like if the thing that the PS5 Pro does is all it does is give you a good image quality with the resolution, specifically with their PSSR or PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, which is their new in-house machine learning upscaling methodology that should be similar in style to what DLSS or XESS do. Who knows how good it is, right? That's like the big thing to see when this comes out is like how good is PlayStation's in-house version of that. But if that works well, to me, that's like, yes, like I mean, I would buy that partially because I want to give my Bane PS5 to my dad so he can start playing PS5 games. So I have like a reason to want to get a new PS5 anyways. Since our household at least would buy a new PS5 just for him. I would rather just buy the slightly more expensive, better one for me, and then give my original one to him. So that gives me like a reason to want to buy a new PS5. If I didn't have that, I don't think, the question is the price as well. But assuming that this is relatively reasonably priced, if I didn't have that reason, I don't think I would really be on the market for it. But if you give me a nice looking fucking resolution image quality that actually fixes that problem, regardless of whatever it does to frame rates, like that to me is enough of a reason for this thing to exist. Not a reason for like millions of people to go buy it and like to be like incredibly excited about, but as like a premium niche product for a particular customer, like sure, that's at least a reason for it to exist.
Sure, and I don't disagree with that, and I think that is but I think you are outlining the best case scenario, and I do think it's striking, and this was also kind of the conclusion Digital Foundry came to and other analysis I've seen from learned people in this, it is striking how modest that is when you put it like that, how narrow a target that seems to be. And I guess for me, there's also just the frustration of, okay, but how many, it feels a little bit like some of this image quality and resolution stuff is like 60 FPS on consoles, where like it always seems like we're almost there, but you give it a year or two and developers have moved on to something that makes whatever solution you had then not work anymore. And we've been through this for like a decade now with the PS4 Pro and then the PS5 and now this, and I've also seen like some of this is stuff that exists in the PC space, but even in the PC space, which I know adjacent because my brother is a big PC gamer and I listen to him talk about a lot of this stuff, and he's built his PCs and deals with all of this. And like, you know, these solutions are not perfect over there. They often take, one thing that could be nice about the PS5 Pro is it could be more stable and, you know, certainly affordable than a lot of the PC solutions on the market right now. But like, I don't know. I'm curious. I'm curious about how much we're going to be leaning on AI and machine learning driven image reconstruction, and whether or not there is eventually a real downside to that I think we maybe have not seen yet, because, you know, these tools are only as good as they are programmed to be. And I think with a lot of the other AI stuff we've seen in the world, people going too far too fast and making shitty products. You know, I've got that on the mind right now for like the recent machine learning created restorations of James Cameron's movies, which looked abysmal and completely fucked those films up and stuff like that. And I know this is a different technological process, but I don't know. I'm curious about all that.
Yeah. I mean, I think from my perspective, I think the big thing that Sony and Microsoft missed the boat on, not because they did anything wrong, it's just this is the nature of like technology, is the timing of when these consoles came out, is that they missed the window on being able to include the machine learning upscaling technology, which has become kind of like the foundation of where PC gaming has gone, right? It is the thing that NVIDIA has built like their entire technical platform around, is DLSS and its like various upgrades that has not stopped at image reconstruction that makes it so that you can internally render the game at a lower resolution, but visually perceive an image that is roughly equivalent to what would look like the 4K native thing. And if you do that well, and you have a high enough internal resolution that like you can use the DLSS quality preset, everybody's impression seems to be like this is a huge performance gain for what is just as good, if not in certain ways in terms of anti-aliasing, arguably a better image than the native rendering, because you'd have to do some sort of post-processing on it anyways in terms of anti-aliasing, and DLSS takes care of that. So it's like that's a huge performance benefit. Then NVIDIA has also moved on to doing like frame generation and things like that in DLSS 3. And it seems clear to me that that is like, for the foreseeable future, you're right, maybe like 5-10 years down the line, who knows, like something new will happen, a new avenue will be opened up. But this is like clearly the thing that is making high resolution games at higher frame rates when you're talking about ray tracing, Unreal Engine 5, like these kinds of next generation rendering features. This technology is necessary for that stuff to fundamentally work. Because it's happening anyways on console games right now, right? They're doing that on the PS5 and Xbox Series X. They're just using a shitty method to do it because they don't have the hardware built in to do a better way. So they're having to rely on software-based solutions like FSR2. So it feels like the linchpin for the PlayStation 6 and whatever thing that Xbox is working on next, their Xbox Series Z or whatever stupid name they're going to give it because they can't give a normal name to a product, it's going to be this machine learning stuff. Like that is going to be the thing that those consoles are based around. So it makes sense to me from that perspective, from Sony's side, to say, hey, let's get our version of this in a product that's on the market to like work out the kinks and all that kind of stuff, and like have it like be a thing that's we know is like really good and ready for our more broad public launch with the PS6 that's going to be hitting their whole customer base, rather than this like tech enthusiast thing that the PS5 Pro will hit. But I think this kind of image reconstruction stuff, I think this is here to stay for a long time. So it makes sense that you would want to have a product with it that would, in the short term, I think is very likely to fix the specific image quality issues that these games have had, and that we know that more games are going to have the further we go into the generation. Now that most studios that were on UE4, they're now putting out UE5 games, and UE5 games have a lot of very impressive tech, but a lot of them have not actually visually looked very good because the resolution is so shit, and they have all these crazy ghosting issues with FSR2.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I think, that's the thing that has been clear for a while in the push towards 4K gaming, is that actual native resolution 4K gaming is just kind of an impossibility on consumer hardware for a lot of games. And that is why you need this. And it's a ceiling that we're not going to get past by pushing raw horsepower is the thing, right? So I get all that. And I think a good solution would be great to have, but even now, I mean, we see issues like there's plenty of third-party games that FSR2 has its limitations, but some of them aren't even using that. I remember like Square Enix, I think on Final Fantasy 16 and possibly 7 Rebirth, I need to recheck this, wasn't even using the best image reconstruction available on the PS5 yet. And I'm curious, like, will we be able to get the third-party developers, like, actively using the tools that are there in the PS5 Pro? Because this is another console everyone has to develop for in a time when, you've got 2 Xboxes, you've got the PS5. Most PS5 games are also coming out on PS4 still. There's just so many different moving pieces that I know can create all these sorts of fucking headaches. So I'm curious about it. It's going to be an interesting release. I do think there is also the flip side of that, of just, there is clearly, I think, a general frustration in the atmosphere right now for the current gaming generation and the idea of already introducing new hardware. And this isn't just me. This is because I don't care that much. I don't need to buy it. I'm not going to buy it. I don't really care. But like, you can see just the general frustration and the feeling that like the PS5 has, for the most part, acted like a PS4 Pro 2, with only a couple of genuine exclusive games having come out over the last year or so. And really kind of only Insomniac, in terms of internal developers, really pushing everything that is there on the hardware. And we're already talking about the next one to fix the flaws of the system that hasn't even been fully, we haven't even seen developers make full use of what's there already yet. This was even something I heard the Digital Foundry guys voice in their video about this. So I think that frustration is also something that I'm curious how Sony messages around, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, but it is also, it's the like eternal treadmill. Like these. It's kind of what I was saying earlier about like, chasing the 4K dragon or the 60 FPS dragon, whatever it is. Like I think there's a desire for a lot of people, and I think partially there's like a larger amount of tech savviness amongst the broad gaming public. But it's not like actually they're tech savvy, but they know more than they did, the equivalent consumer did 5 years ago or whatever. Partially because I think the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X kind of forced people to learn more about this shit, because now you have to pick a mode, right? You never got to pick a mode on, like, if you want higher resolution or frame rate on the PS2 or the 360, right? That wasn't a thing. So it's like it's forced people to kind of learn a little bit more. And now people are like aware of the compromises because they have been presented that the compromise existed. Right. We were fine with the compromises in the Xbox 360 generation, where most games ran like complete shit, and getting like a decent 30 frames per second was like a Hail Mary prayer. Nobody, like, it's not that nobody cared. Obviously there were people that cared, but the broader gaming public, generally speaking, didn't really care because they didn't know any better. And there was no toggle that said, oh, well, now the game runs at like a good frame rate, but it kind of looks like shit. That was just like not a thing you had. And so even though like we are at this point where most games on console target 60 frames per second, and it's been like that, even next gen games, like even stuff like Spider-Man 2 are targeting 60 frames per second, way more than has ever been done. Like I would bet, if you went and did the numbers, I bet it's even more than the fucking PS2 generation, which was the last time we saw 60 frames per second being a thing that a lot of games were like hitting, or certainly were at least targeting. So like one of the things I think is interesting about the hand-wringing around the PS5 Pro is people concerned about what it's going to do for frame rates, when it's like frame rates haven't really been the problem for most games. The frame rates are kind of fine, right? Like on like Final Fantasy 16, like if you want to do the 60 FPS mode outside of like the weird choice they made with where it switches between 60 FPS and 30 FPS if you're in the battle combat or not, like that's like a weird choice. But when you're in the combat in Final Fantasy 16 in the 60 FPS mode, it's generally running at 60 FPS. The problem is that it's an incredibly low resolution. So it's like we've kind of, hit a point where most developers are including a mode that's trying to target 60 FPS, but we're doing it by sacrificing the resolution. And a lot of people now are not accepting 30 FPS as like a thing that they want to have in their console game, because now they have been given the option and now they're like stuck between a rock and a hard place. It's kind of like the thing I issued with Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, where it doesn't bother me that much, but there's neither of those modes are perfect. And I would have never really thought much about it if I was never given the choice of the two modes. I would have been like, oh, it's kind of funky that the cutscenes are at a lower resolution, and then I would have moved on with my life. But now I'm watching it being like, well, the low resolution of the cutscenes wouldn't have bothered me as much if the resolution in the normal game was as high as it is. Oh, but if I did that, then now the lower frame rate in the cinematic sequences and the fights, that's going to bother me because now I'm comparing it to the 60 FPS in the gameplay around it. Like, those choices have now made it that people are going to be frustrated with things that are generally technically way, way better relative to the kinds of equivalent games you had one generation ago, or definitely two generations ago, where this shit was bad.
Yeah. No, totally. We are spoiled on all of that. There's no doubt about that. And yeah, it's just, it opens interesting questions about kind of the future of the PlayStation/Xbox console space. Because, I mean, the other big question mark here is, from what we know so far, Xbox is not planning a mid-generation refresh like this. In fact, they might be going the Wii U to Nintendo Switch route and just starting the next generation sooner than they otherwise would, like 2026 or 2025. So we'll see about that. But it means the PS5 Pro would be kind of a solo market leader over here for a while in terms of what it can do in the console space.
Yeah, I'm very skeptical of I see a lot of people repeat the Xbox is going for a 2026 thing, but there haven't, as far as I've seen, there have been no rumors that actually sort of indicate that that's a thing that they're actually trying to do. Or I just see a lot of people kind of repeat that and repeat Xbox is going to make a handheld thing, and it's like, for me, that's a lot of wishful thinking. They might do it, but there hasn't actually been anything indicating it. I'm curious. Clearly Xbox is going to make at least one more console, right? They've committed to making the most powerful leap we've ever seen between console generations, as they said in their podcast. But I'm curious what the existence of a PS5 Pro, when there's no equivalent thing on the Xbox side, does that matter? How much can it matter? Xbox is already selling half as much as PS5 in the US, which is Xbox's strongest market. But it definitely, it's weird because it's going to put them in this really unbalanced position. Because we had the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X were, broadly equivalent machines. The Xbox One X was more powerful, but they existed in the same core sort of tier or whatever, whereas now we're going to have this very lopsided thing where you've got this lower tier Xbox that there's no PlayStation equivalent to, and this higher tier PlayStation where there's no Xbox equivalent, and it definitely makes the console space, I think, is going to feel kind of weird because it's sort of broken up in this weird sort of uneven fashion.
It does make me wonder if the Xbox Series S becomes a real fucking anchor on that company. Because right now you have to have a version on both if you're going to release on Xbox. That's their rule. And, Baldur's Gate 3 had to get an exception to change one feature so it could release on Xbox because the Series S wasn't powerful enough. I think it was local co-op was the thing they had to cut for Series S, whatever the case is. But now, let's say you are making a cross-platform game. You're going to have to make that game work on the Xbox Series S up to the PS5 Pro if it's launching on both of those platforms. And that's where I do wonder if at a certain point we'll go, yeah, Xbox, I don't know. The PlayStation might throw some money at us for exclusivity, and that Xbox Series S is a fucking, beast to try to figure out how to work for. And I'm curious how that changes things as well.
Yeah, because I think it's interesting. Dragon's Dogma 2 just came out. A game I'm very excited for. Obviously, it is kind of the poster child for talking about resolution and frame rate stuff right now, because it is a incredibly CPU heavy game. It's just the nature of Dragon's Dogma. It's very simulation heavy. It's just what it is. It doesn't run well on PCs. But what's really interesting, if I watched the Digital Foundry breakdown of it, is that the Xbox Series X and PS5 versions, and what they generally recommend you would do on PC, assuming you've got, half decent hardware, something that's at least as good as PS5 and PC, which you're likely to have, the game has ray traced global illumination, and the game looks really nice. Like, the lighting in the game looks really good. But the Xbox Series S does not have the ray traced global illumination, so it has like more traditional lighting solutions, and it just looks so flat in comparison. And it's one of the things that's been like one of the most stark, right, like the Series S just can't do this, right? Where they pitched the Series S as being we're going to have a 4K game on Xbox Series X and a 1080p game on Series S, and they've tried to design the console around that idea. But of course, the reality is that not everything in terms of rendering a game and the technology it uses scales evenly like that. And also, they made some choices on the memory side for the Series S that doesn't scale quite evenly either. And so you're starting to see more games now that are these next-gen only games using like next-gen graphics technologies like ray tracing and stuff, that when they have to put out a Series S version, they just rip that shit out completely. Like, I think Talos Principle 2, I believe, is the other game that's done the same thing, where they have a global illumination system that uses ray tracing on the higher tier consoles, and then you just have this like very flat, shitty looking game that has like this really that looks like worse lighting than it would have had if that was the only lighting solution, right? Like, because obviously it's the old school techniques that we've been used to for a while, but that's not the version that the developers clearly have put the most emphasis in how you light it. So it looks worse than it would otherwise. And so I do think that the Series S is getting into an awkward position with that stuff. Now that we're moving into a position where most games are becoming next-gen, quote-unquote, next-gen exclusives, of PS5, Xbox Series X only, that the Series S is now having to rip out, like, really notable rendering features and things that kind of are defining elements of how that game looks on the PS5 and Series X, and then the Series S just looks more like when you had an Xbox One game that then you had the Xbox 360 version of, like Gun or something like that, and you looked at that cross-generation thing, and it just kind of looks like a different game because a core rendering feature is just not present anymore.
Right.
And so, yeah, the Series S is definitely in a weird place right now, I think.
Yeah. I guess my other reaction to something you were saying earlier, Sean, is that, like, consumers are more knowledgeable about the differences, and that's why you can, I think something like the PS5 Pro would have been unthinkable in the PS2 or PS3 generation, because just the idea of options wasn't there. I do think the flip side, and I feel like this is where I'm at with it, is I already feel so spoiled by what the PS5 is that I have no urge to upgrade, even if I had the money. And like, I can like intellectually understand why it is needed for some of the image quality issues we're seeing. And maybe it's just because and I've certainly played some games where I've had some of those issues, but I find myself not caring that much because everything that the PS5 has to offer already feels so luxurious for me as a console gamer. You already have these insane loading times, and you have nice frame rates, and you generally still do have options of how you want to play on there, that like it still feels very new to me. Maybe part of that is also that I bounce back and forth between my PlayStation and my Switch, and so the PlayStation always feels fairly next gen next to that. For obvious reasons, that I also think that that's probably a very sizable size of the audience too. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious what Sony is like projecting with this. I'm curious how they're going to price it. I'm curious if that goes with a base PS5 price cut. I do think if it goes with that, I actually think it'll probably be less like they get a boost from PS5 Pro sales literally than a boost from the PS5 Pro makes the base PS5 look like a good deal and gets more people in the market, which is kind of the pricing ladder idea. So it's going to be interesting just to see how they pitch this thing.
Yeah, but yeah, like I'm personally interested in it because the whole thing of like I want my dad to be able to have a PS5, and I would like to have these games have like a higher resolution. There just have been a few games like Resident Evil 4 Remake that are great games. Like, it's a great game and it looks good, but it notably looks gunky to me, like compared to. And again, this is in terms of raw resolution compared to like a lot of games looked on the PS4 Pro, because they're running at lower resolutions than that. And FSR2 just has like, I'm annoyed that I have played enough of these games now that I can notice the weird like ghosting and things like that happen on things like transparent like grass and shit like that, and things that move, that you get these weird ghosting artifacts. Now I'm starting to notice that when I play the more next gen games, and it's just been nice, so the last few games I've played have all been, they're games that have less sort of technically advanced rendering features, like something like Yakuza Like a Dragon or Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, but like they have like really crisp image quality. They look good. They've got strong art direction. And sometimes it's nice to just have that and have that really crisp image and be able to admire that rather than having it kind of look blurry and you kind of have to squint at it. So I would very much appreciate the higher resolution. If that's the only thing it does, like I'm happy with that. Like that's like my sort of internal justification for the purchase. I'll obviously wait to see like what the reviews and stuff say, but it's very similar to the Series S. When I bought my Series S, I was like, if all I do with this console is I use it as a Halo device, that is enough for me. And it's like, that's how I try to spend my money, is I set, here's my objective. If I get more than this, awesome. If I get less than this, then I fucked up. But if all I do on this console is I play through all these Halo games and I have fun and do that, then that is enough for me to spend the money on this and have it and be happy with that purchase. If the PS5 Pro just gives me nice looking image quality and it doesn't touch frame rate in any meaningful way or anything else, I would be happy with that purchase, assuming that it's like no more than $600. Like $600 would be the absolute ceiling, I think, for me.
Yeah. The flip side of that, though, is people could also just be making more games like what you're talking about, that don't take 7 years to develop and have, crazy detailed, graphics on everything that make it very hard to render. We could just have more Yakuzas and Personas in the world. And I think that would also be a solution.
Unfortunately, I can't make them do that. It's like, so I can buy the PS5 Pro. I can't go over to them and be like, have you played some of these like cool Japanese games made by smaller teams that like have just been like, pumping away at it forever? Like what if you kind of tried to do some of what these games do? I would love to be able to get some of those studios to scale back a little bit. But I have no power over that.
Well, we will see then. All right, you want to talk about some video games, Sean?
Yeah, let's talk about those video games, Jonathan.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and kick it off because you were talking a lot in that last segment. Give you a break, and I will talk about Persona 3 Reload, the remake of Persona 3. We've talked about it a couple times on the podcast, but I have now finished it, and so I wanted to give some overall thoughts on the game, on the remake of what I have previously called my favorite game of all time. Just for people who are curious, it took me 90 hours to clear Persona 3 Reload, playing pretty thoroughly, finished all the social links, got all the personas, all of that stuff, was very thorough in Tartarus. The equivalent playthrough for me on FES or Portable, the older versions of Persona 3, was about 60 hours.
Yeah.
So it's a solid 30 hours longer. And I would say that is a mix of a lot of the content that was already there in the older versions is voiced now, so it just takes longer to go through the game because of that. Like, every social link event is voiced. So if you're listening to the voices, it takes a lot longer to go through those social link events than if you were just reading the text. So there's that. Tartarus has been fleshed out in a way that I do think means you spend more time in Tartarus. There's more stuff to do there. So that certainly adds to the length as well. And then there is a significant amount of new content. And I don't think I've really talked about any of it on the podcast, because last time we did a normal episode and we're talking about it, I wasn't far enough in. The first half or so of Persona 3 Reload does not have a ton of like brand new material. It really is the second half, I'd say, after you get Aegis and everything kind of in the late summer, fall, winter, where they really start fleshing things out. And I think this is by far the greatest strength of Persona 3 Reload. The best part of this remake is, I think, where they have gone in and fixed the parts that genuinely had problems in Persona 3. The biggest one of which is they have really heavily overhauled the entire Shinji Ken section of the game, where you have Ken, the little boy, join the team, and Shinji, Amada, why am I forgetting everybody's names?
Akihiko?
Akihiko's, yeah, there we go. Akihiko's friend.
I'm amazed. Sorry. I knew who you were trying to talk about.
No, I know. Akihiko's shady-looking friend, and so you have Shinji join the team, and of course, that ends in tragedy. I don't want to be too spoilery here, but, all of that happens. And they have just, that part has been uplifted in so many good ways, where so Persona 3 Reload is just the male protagonist. So they don't have the female route that Portable had. in Portable with the female route, you did have social links with all of your male team members, which is not a thing in the base version of Persona 3 or in Reload. What Reload has replaced those with is these sort of extra social link style events that you can do with some of your male teammates, all of your male teammates. So Junpei and Ken and Shinji and Akihiko and all of those characters, right? So they've added those, and the ones for Ken and Shinji in particular, which happen all around the month of October, leading up to when things go down, they're extraordinary. They're some of the best writing in any Persona game. They're really, really good. They really bring you into those characters more. They've added more just scenes within the story of the game in general around those characters and how they are integrated into the game. You know, Shinji and Ken are also just integrated into the world of the universe of the game much more fully. So there's all sorts of activities you can do in the dorm with your dorm mates, with the other members of C's. And so it's not just that Shinji is kind of hanging out, but you can do little cooking events with him. And you can do gardening with him. And with Ken, you can watch TV with him. And so you have all of that. And Koromaru benefits from this as well. Koromaru, the dog character, is like way, way, way more integrated into the plot and into all of these events. And it's not just you can take him on walks, but you can do these brushing events. You can watch this DVD that he brings you about wolf packs because he wants to learn about his ancestors. So there's all of that stuff. And so they've really fleshed out, I would say, like the second group that joins C's, the like post-Igus group of characters who are really kind of afterthoughts in the original game. Like Ken and Koromaru effectively disappear from the game in terms of the actual plot after all the stuff with Shinji goes down. Like they are there in some cutscenes, but they're really, like, I forgot, they're not even there at the end of the game when everyone is celebrating and going to the roof to meet the protagonist. They're not in those cutscenes in the original game. They've added them in for Reload, which I think is very good. They've like made them full characters and parts of the team. And that's how the movies do it, for instance. So they've taken some cues from the movies here as well. So they've just really fleshed out that stretch of the game. Once you're through this Shinji stuff, they keep Ken and Koromaru much more present. It feels like Ken in particular just gets a lot more of a denouement on that side of the story than he got before. Koromaru gets more stuff. And then when the character Ryoji enters the story in December, everyone who's played Persona 3 knows that character very well. They've also added a bit more material with Ryoji. He gets his own social link. They're not a social link, but the like pseudo social link thing. And you can do that with Ryoji. So he has quite a bit more material. And I think all of it just strengthens the story in really important ways. They've also fleshed out the side of the game with Strega, the characters that Takaya, Jin, and Chitanda.
Chidori?
Chidori. Sorry, Chitanda is a character from a show we've watched somewhere else.
Yes, I'm very curious.
Yes. Anyway, no. But yes, that would be Hyoka. Anyway, I'm getting all my Japanese names mixed up. But yes, you have Chidori in this one. And Chidori is the character who gets the most content in the original Persona 3 because she and Junpei are very close, and that's kind of Junpei's story in the second half of the game. And all of that is still there and still good. But with Takaya and Jin, they've done more stuff, including like something that was very clearly inspired by the social link with again, I'm gonna be blanking on names all day today.
Akechi
No, not Akechi, the killer in Persona 4.
Adachi.
The detective. Adachi, yeah. So you know how Adachi has a social link in Persona 4 and it's the creepiest thing in any of these games? They don't quite go that far, and honestly, I wish they had just gone the full 9 yards and done a Takaya social link, because that would have been fucking amazing. But they do have additional events between Takaya and the protagonist, and they are very creepy and very well done, and feel very inspired by the Adachi parts of Persona 4. So that's nice. So all of that stuff has been fleshed out in a way that, like, the comparison I kept drawing for in my mind was the Lord of the Rings extended cuts, where there's, for the most part, nothing wrong with the Lord of the Rings theatrical cuts. I mean, they made so much money in theaters. They, the third one won Best Picture. Very acclaimed. Clearly, they work in their 3-hour theatrical cut versions. But once you've seen the extended cuts, it's kind of hard to go back because the additional context they add for characters, almost nothing in those extended cuts is like new plot material, but the way it fleshes out individual characters and their motivations and kind of on the other side of things, how they react to certain scenarios, just makes the stories feel richer. And I would say that's the general approach Persona 3 Reload takes, particularly in the second half of the game. It feels like a Lord of the Rings extended cut style version of Persona 3, and I think that's the biggest like justification for this remake to exist, more than any of the graphics or any of the niceties that they've added, or even like the overhaul of Tartarus, which I think is really well done and makes Tartarus extremely fun to play in a way that even in the original I don't think it ever quite was. All of that is good, but that kind of extended story material they've given and some of the really good presentation. So for instance, the big scene where Shinji meets his fate in the original game is kind of an awkward cutscene with, you know, just your character portraits and your polygonal characters over here, and everything kind of is implied by sound effects. That gets a full 3D in-engine cutscene this time, and it's really... The 3D in-engine cutscenes in this game are really good. They're quite a big step up from what we had in Persona 5. They've taken that basic kind of technical quality, but they're really well-directed and well done, and stand... Honestly, they're better than the animated cutscenes in this one. The animated cutscenes in this one, they were animated by Wit Studio. They look fine. They really pale in comparison to the original Persona 3's animated cutscenes. And honestly, I think the stuff that I was most impressed with in the direction is in the 3D and engine cutscenes in this one, which I kind of never expected to say of a Persona game, but they're really well done.
I do feel like it was such a huge boon to Persona 5 that it got to like the in-engine 3D character models and stuff got to the point where you could do that. Because like Persona 3 and 4, like they needed those 2D animated cutscenes in a way where it's like, honestly, like Persona 5 and Persona 3 Reload having them feels like a throwback rather than a like necessary narrative feature, where it's like Persona 3 Fest, you would not, like the story in that game would not totally work if you did not have those 2D animated cutscenes and replace them with the other equivalent storytelling methods they had, because they're just not high fidelity enough in terms of how they could show character in things. So you needed those 2D animated cutscenes. By the time you get to Persona 5, and especially some of like the original stuff they did in the Royal, which pushed it up, and I assume Persona 3 Reload is like another jump up from that. Like once it gets that good, like those are obviously much more cost effective for the studios for the amount of story they have to do. And when they can look that good, like that's awesome. Like I'm very happy to hear that, because I do think that that's an area that that a game like Persona 3 Reload clearly can improve on and has a big advantage over the original.
Yeah, and so I think that presentation is really good, and then all of the just extended plot material, the new writing, it just fits in so seamlessly. It's where it feels like this remake has the biggest reason to exist and sit on the shelf alongside the original, and where it comes closest to feeling like a definitive new version of Persona 3 that has really fleshed out this story. And I love that. And again, the presentation side of it, I should not undercount. It is extraordinary. What they do with the final scene on the rooftop, you know what I'm talking about if you've played Persona 3, it's absolutely extraordinary, the way they do the ending of this game. It's very inspired by how the movies do it, like it is... like down to like the editorial pattern of it is taken from the movie, so they've taken some inspiration from that, but it is an extremely powerful rendition of the ending of this game, and I was very happy to see that. So yeah, I mean, it's a great remake. It is extremely well done. There is a certain... This is not that the remake did anything wrong. I think the remake, this is like either a 10 out of 10 remake or a 9.5 out of 10. If you're just talking about remaking one great game into a new era, it does it really well, especially if you're thinking about a faithful remake, not a Resident Evil 4 style, let's rethink the whole game from the ground up remake. This is more of the faithful style. I think it's really good. I think there is a certain je ne sais quoi to the PS2 version that you just can't quite capture outside of the PS2, or crucially, if you don't have Yumi Kawamura doing the music. I do like the vocalist on Persona 3 Reload. I think some of the songs even, her voice suits better. I think Changing Seasons is better in Persona 3 Reload than it was in the original, in part because they fleshed it out and given it actual lyrics now. But like, I love that song here. When you get to the end and you get Memories of You, I did miss Yumi Kawamura a little bit. I think, you know, her voice is so crucial. There are just things like that I miss a little bit. And I don't know if it's nostalgia, if it's just atmosphere. There's also like the visuals of the PS2 game are just a little grittier in their color scheme. They're a little darker. And Persona 3 Reload is a bit brighter, more on the scale of a Persona 5 or a Persona 4 Golden. And so there's little things like that mean that, you know, I would not say that like this completely replaces the PS2 game for me, But I think another test would be, is this the version of the game I would recommend to someone who has never played Persona 3? Absolutely, 100%. In part because it's very easy to get. It's on PS4, it's on PS5, it's on Xbox, it's everywhere, right? And I would say if you've never played Persona 3 before, absolutely just go play Reload. It is the version of the game to play. You will not be disappointed. It's fantastic. And since we last recorded the podcast, we know it will be getting the episode Aegis DLC. Yes. They announced that. And I am particularly excited for that because episode Aegis, for those who don't know, is a long sort of 20-hour epilogue to the main game that was included on Persona 3 FES on the PS2. And it is, in terms of, it's got a narrative, but then in terms of story, it is just more Tartarus. It is more dungeon crawling. And I think I never really enjoyed it on that level. I don't think the dungeon stuff is good enough in the original Persona 3 to support its own game. I do think all the improvements they've made to Tartarus in Persona 3 Reload actually makes me pretty excited for episode Aegis, because I think, especially assuming that they'll do a little even more work on it for the DLC, I think it could be really, really fun to have kind of a challenge mode version of Tartarus that you would get in that, and getting to see the whole story redone with the new presentation style, everybody coming in presumably to do more voice acting. I'm guessing they will do more material with like Metis, who is the Aegis other character counterpart that you get in that. And so all of that I'm very excited to see. So it is not hard for me to recommend Persona 3 Reload. It is 100% the version newbies should play.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I didn't even know that it had that much new narrative content in it, because I don't think, I think, just not as many people played Persona 3, so I think it's just like there was a lot of new people to Persona 3 Reload, so they wouldn't have had that context. But yeah, I just didn't like sort of have the sense it had, like when you said that it took you 90 hours, I was surprised, because like that's a lot longer than Persona 3. That's Persona 5 runtimes, or like Persona for the Golden. But I think I get what you're saying with like the je ne sais quoi, like there's like a certain something, because that's very much how I feel about Persona 4 and Persona 4 the Golden. Outside, there's like a couple of like story things like the epilogue in Golden that I think like are bad. But in general, most of Persona 4 the Golden is just kind of like, from a very kind of objective perspective, just a better version. It's got more options. It has like higher resolution character models. It's got new music and new things and all, it's like new spruced up. But at the same time, that the tone of the game shifts in a notable way when you have added all this new stuff and you have higher resolution graphics and all that. And when you go back to the PS2 version of Persona 4, that game is grungy and dark and fucked up. Like that game, people get fucking murdered. And when you start with pursuing your true self as opposed to Shadow World, it's a notable shift in the tone. Now, that doesn't mean that Persona 4 the Golden is bad, and it is the version I would recommend to people, because obviously, it's also the version easy to play on modern devices. But it's something I still have in my heart, of like that experience of playing, I played it on my computer emulating the game. But I had the actual PS2 DVD. I put that DVD in my computer, and I was legit emulation. That wasn't I didn't download no fucking ROMs or no ISOs for that shit. That was my hard-earned money, bought that disc. I just didn't put it into PS2 because I didn't have one at the time. But that experience of playing that version of the game with that aesthetic and that tone and that like dark, fucked up PS2 style, like there's something to it. So yeah, like but I also don't think it's a thing that a new game should really try to replicate, because I just don't think it could. So I think I like that it sounds like Persona 3 Reload leans into what it does. It leans into its slightly new thing. It has more new content than I thought. Like that makes me even more excited to play through it.
Yeah. No, you're going to love it. And I will say, I think the tonal gap, and I have not played through the PS2 version of Persona 4, but I've seen the videos, you've explained it to me. I think the tonal gap is much smaller here. I don't think it has been brightened up in any, it's only kind of the visual layer. I think thematically and narratively, it understands what Persona 3 is about really, really well, and I do think it's pretty informed by the movie project that happened as well. I think a lot of that material got pulled in terms of inspiration for Reload. So all of that is great. It's just kind of my own personal nostalgia. But there is one other thing I want to say about Persona 3 here while we're talking, and this is just a personal revelation I had playing at this time, which is, I love Persona 3. It means a lot to me. It was so important to me at the moment I played it in my life. For those who are not decade-long, 11-year-long Weekly Stuff podcast listeners, my father passed away the first year we were doing this podcast in 2012, and I played Persona 3 the year after that. And so it was only the second year of our show when I played that game and we talked about it, and I can't even begin to tell you how important Persona 3 was to me in processing his death and a lot of the emotions around that and the emotions around death in general. And it is such an important story for me, and it was so important for me in that moment in my life, and I've carried it with me, and I think I will always carry it with me. And Persona 3 Reload, it definitely underlined for me what a special story this is, what a unique video game this is, what a tremendous set of characters and a world and soundtrack this game has. But I also realized I don't think it's my favorite game anymore. And it's not necessarily that the game has done anything differently or wrong. That is not a reflection on the remake. It is more a reflection on me being 10, 11 years older and having played a lot more games. And, you know, one thing I was thinking too was when I played Persona 5 Royal a few years ago and we did our big P5R podcast, you know, one thing I kept saying was, this might be the best game of all time. I just had that feeling over and over again, because you take Persona 5, which was already tremendous, and all the nips and tucks they made, and then all the additional content. Just Persona 5 Royal is so powerful, and I think it speaks to the moment we live in the world politically and emotionally in such powerful ways. That was this overwhelming feeling I had playing Persona 5 Royal. And that is not the feeling I had playing Persona 3 Reload. And again, this is not a reflection on that. But I do think comparing them, I think it is like very clear to me that of the Persona games, Persona 5 Royal is the best one. I would put Persona 3 under that. I do still probably put Persona 3 above Persona 4. And then the question of favorite is always a difficult one. But I think if I were saying, you know, what is the game that has the most impact on me today, it would probably be something like Persona 5 Royal or Elden Ring. I remember those were games that we played like back to back, and we're both like, is this the greatest game of all time? So stuff like that. Or, you know, the 2002 Resident Evil remake, or Metroid Prime, or I was thinking about that this morning because I was playing some Final Fantasy, and I was thinking, you know, Crisis Core is also one of my favorite games of all time now that I think about it. And I think those would all be in the conversation. And that is not me saying that now this is not the headline of this podcast is Jonathan hates Persona 3 now. It is Jonathan loves and will always love Persona 3, but it just might not be my favorite game anymore. And that is something I maybe need to think about. Maybe I need to try making a new list and reconsider this, because this changes over the course of your life, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, like, it was my number one, and then I played, you know, Nier Automata had that kind of, you know, a similar but different kind of impact on me. Obviously now, like, you know, if we try to do this right, if we did a, like, new top 10 games thing, I'd be looking at Genshin Impact and be like, I don't even know what to do with you. I mean, how do you rate a game that's, like, who knows when it will be, quote unquote, done? Like, when you are, like,
Sean, I think if we're being honest, what it would be is my top 10 would be 10 different games I would go through, and your top 10 would just be 10 different parts of Genshin Impact you like, all in a row,
it's
with
like,
no other games.
Here's the Genshin Impact 1.1, where we got Dragonspine Mountain. It's like, 2.0. I mean, that's good, and 3.0 and 4.0. Those are going to be very high up. But there were, like, I think 2.7, I think, was when they added the Chasm, and man, that was a hell of an update. Yeah. But yeah, it's, you know, as you get older and, like, things, you know, change. Yeah, like, I think that is something that happens. You know, that's just like the feeling I had when I played Nier Automata, was like looking long and hard at myself and being like, what is at the top? And yeah, like, I think, you know, if I'm being realistic, you know, and I allowed myself to include Genshin Impact, even as, like, weird as it is, because it's such a different beast, because it's an ongoing thing. You know, it's my favorite game at this moment. It's hard to know, because it's not a thing I am in the capacity to look back and reflect on, because it's not over. But yeah, but I like, you know, but I like having what is in that number one spot evolve over time. Feels a lot more natural and real than being like, oh, well, it's Tetris. I'm just going to leave it as Tetris forever, because Tetris is really good, and I don't have to, and nobody can argue about it. Because, like, I mean, you can't argue against them. Like, yeah, I understand. Tetris is a good choice. You know, it's a hell of a game. Who can say that it doesn't belong in that top spot? But also, like, if you just sort of put it there and then dig in and then refuse to ever move it, I think that's, like, a different a different thing. So yeah, it's interesting because I was curious if Persona 3 would ever fall out of that spot for you.
Yeah. And I think part of it also was just because I played Persona 5 Royal relatively recently, playing this also just emphasized for me how fucking good Persona 5 Royal is.
Oh, yeah.
Because Persona 5 Royal is longer than 3 Reload. It's probably 120 hours, but that's not that much longer. But it feels like 7 times longer because that game is so dense.
Yeah.
And it has so much content. When you're talking about the amount of things you do in the overworld, the amount of relationships and turns in the story, the amount of themes that it encompasses, the difference between the mementos, which is sort of like Tartarus style dungeon crawling, versus the palaces. Like, oh my god, Persona 5 Royal is just as complete a package as a video game has ever been. And like, there was something a little bit about going to Persona 3, but with like PS5 graphics of like, I love this game. I'm glad they didn't completely overhaul all of that, but you do feel it is a simpler, more repetitive general kind of experience than the just absurd richness of Persona 5 and its incredible acid jazz soundtrack and all of that. God, that game's so good.
Yes, yeah. The Persona games, turns out they're fucking great. And I am so excited that they're doing episode Aegis. I was hoping that they would, but they didn't announce it before the game came out. I mean, obviously, because they don't want to have like a big controversy. They're cutting out episode Aegis this for DLC. It's like they're already, people are saying that. It's like, well, it was in Persona 3 Fest on the PS2, so now they're cheating us by not putting it. It's like, fucking shut the fuck up. You don't know how anything works. Idiot people on the internet. It's the same people who said that shit for the Separate Ways DLC for Resident Evil 4 Remake. Maybe on to slap them across the face. So it's like, obviously they don't want to just announce it before the game because it's going to get even more dumb idiots online getting angry at them over something that's not a thing to be angry about. But I'm happy now that they've confirmed that they're doing it, because it is the thing that, like, I really enjoyed that in Persona 3 Fest, or I enjoyed it. I never, it's a part that I never played again. But it was by far the most flawed thing in any of the Persona team era Persona games, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
It has so much great stuff, particularly the thing that's frustrating is, like, it's the ending part of it is fucking amazing. Like, once you get to the end, the section in the story where the Heartful Cry song is used, in like the context with that song is played, all that shit, it's incredible. And it's something that no other Persona game has ever tried, like a sequence like that near the end of that. But you got to play like 20 hours of grinding through a dungeon to get to it, with very small morsels of like really fucking radical, heavy metal ass, sick, and 40-second long animated cutscenes. But they're like 40-second long animated cutscenes that you play 10 hours to go see. They're cool as shit. But it's not a lot of story along the way to get to the ending. So I think that it's a thing that clearly expanding on the combat and all that kind of stuff will dramatically improve that, especially if they also include more narrative stuff along the way to kind of like help flesh out the different characters and how they're feeling after the ending of the original game. But it's very cool. I'm very glad they're adding it. I just also hope that means that when you get the DLC and you load up the game, that you have 2 options on the main screen. One of them is called Episode Aegis. But the important thing, and the reason why on this podcast we have been consistent for like 10 years, always referring to it as Episode Aegis instead of The Answer, is not because Episode Aegis is a funny name. It's because Episode Yourself is the best menu option in the history of a video game, because that's what the main story of Persona 3 Fest was Episode Yourself. And it should never be forgotten that is what they called it.
It's so good, and I am pleased that they have announced the DLC worldwide is just called Episode Aegis, which is great, because it is a better name than The Answer. But if they added, it was a DLC option to get it to say Episode Yourself on the menu, and it was an extra $5, I would pay that extra $5.
Hell yeah, I need it, man. It's like the main reason why I wanted to just play Persona 3 Fest purely in Japanese and just get the Japanese version online is for that menu option. It's like I want the legitimate experience the way they intended, which is for me to press the circle button on Episode Yourself and start this video game.
Yes. By the way, that is the other thing I just wanted to say about you mentioning it in Japanese. I played it through with the Japanese voices. God, that cast is out of this fucking world. It is such a cast of all-stars. They're all so great. And I had never played the full game with the Japanese voices. I had heard them in the movies, but I had not played the full game that way. and everyone is so good. You know, you've got Akira Ishida in his triple role of Makoto and Pharaohs and Ryoji, and he's great at all of those. Megumi Toyoguchi as Yukari, she is incredible. Kosuke Toriumi as Junpei, especially with all the extra stuff they've given Junpei here, he is incredible. Hikaru Midorikawa, this might be my favorite Hikaru Midorikawa performance, is as Akihiko. Yeah. He is so good. It is such a great version of Midorikawa. Rie Tanaka as Mitsuru, all of those characters just great. And then, of course, Maya Sakamoto as Aigis. It was something special to get to finally hear Maya Sakamoto do the full game version of Aigis front to back, because the original English Aigis is also just a tremendous performance, but Maya Sakamoto's interpretation is quite a bit different. And I think particularly in the last act of the game, she just knocks it out of the park. The final scene of the game on the rooftop, her performance will rip your heart out and stomp on it. It's incredible. And then the biggest thing for me, the two characters who had the most problematic voice in the original Persona 3 English dub have two of the best voices in Japanese, which is Ken and Shinji. Mm-hmm. Ken is voiced by Megumi Ogata, and she is outstanding. I loved Ken in this game. Ken is so great. I had him on my team for a while. I was doing all these Ken events. Ken is awesome, and I think so much of it is her performance. She is so good at playing him as like this earnest little boy. And it's just incredible. And then the biggest one, the biggest difference for me was finally hearing Kazuya Nakai as Shinji, because in English, in the original English dub of Persona 3, they clearly cast Shinji for how he looked, not who he is. They cast him as like this skater punk kind of voice, you know, is kind of how they had Shinji. And that's not how they did it in Japanese. In Japanese, they went and got Roronoa motherfucking Zoro. That's who they got. They got the biggest badass in the world, because that's the point of Shinji, is that he is the baddest ass motherfucker in the world of Persona, and he's scared of his own power. And you need someone like Kazuya Nakai who can do that. Like, I had Shinji on my team. I decided to go the whole 9 yards and break my own heart by using Shinji for the entire month you have him. And he is by far the most powerful unit you get in the game. He's the most powerful party member in any Persona game. He's incredibly, like, overpowered. And when you have someone like Kazuya Nakai who is able to sell that, that's the kind of voice he can do, it's really incredible. But he can also do the more sensitive side of the character. And it is one of my favorite Kazuya Nakai performances. He is outstanding in this game, especially with all the new material they've given him. Just great. And again, it is just great voices all the way down. Nobutoshi Kana, who was a Lancer in Fate Stay Night, he is Takaya, the character who is the leader of Strega. He's incredible. I had completely forgotten that Miyuki Sawashiro has not one, but two roles in this game, because she's Elizabeth and Chidori. I knew she was Elizabeth. I did not know she was Chidori. She is great. And then I think the other star of this game for me is Bin Shimada, who comes in as Igor. Igor has finally been recast after many years of using the old vocal recordings from Persona 3 and 4, and he does a tremendous Igor. Everyone loves Bin Shimada, but he is also Tanaka, the guy from Tanaka's Amazing Commodities, and that social link being fully voice acted now by Bin Shimada is by far the funniest thing in this game. His performance as Tanaka in those 10 social link events is worth the price of admission all on its own. What a fucking cast this game has. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's a hell of a cast. It was one of the things that was fun about watching the movies, was getting to hear them all, and it's definitely one of the big things I'm very excited about, because you also have Mamiko Noto is Fuka, so it's like that's also just one of my, we got a lot of, it's a very different role than she had in Witcher Mercury as the bomb, but yes. Lady Prospera, but it's just it's such a stacked cast from top to bottom, and it's nice to have a easily accessible version that has all these actors, and then also it's that kind of thing where they get to come back, and it's all these actors who have lived with these characters for a long time getting to come back and do them. Yes. And that was fun. And one video I watched, and they haven't done one in a while. I hope they come back to it. I don't know if it might have been a thing that they only plan to do a few of them. But Tanaka Die, who is the voice of Mitsuru, she has a YouTube channel called Ane-san TV, where she plays games with this cosplayer named Vega. And they did a couple of live streams of like the beginning of this game. And I watched those, and it's very fun. It's interesting to hear her, she's mostly just like reacting to the game, but every once in a while you get a little morsel of like what it was like playing the character and stuff. It's just clear that, It's this character she's been playing for such a long time. 2006 for a lot of these actors is relatively earlier in their career, right? That was not too long after she first started playing Lacus in Gundam Seed, which was like one of her big breakout roles. This is around the time for Sakamoto Maya that she was just starting to play Shiki in Kata no Kyokai. So it's just like an interesting point for a lot of these actresses. Miyuki Sawashiro, she was not Miyuki Sawashiro yet. And so it's cool to see a lot of those actors who were, not minor, but much earlier in their career than they are now get to revisit these characters. The movie had that quality, but I'm sure the game has it even more because it also has way more of the, text and stuff for them.
Yeah. So, good game. We love Persona here. But you know what we also love? Is Yakuza / Like a Dragon / the game I am resisting just going and quitting my job and just giving my life over because every time you talk about it, I want to play it so fucking bad.
Yeah.
But I've already bought Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, so I feel like I have to play it, but I really want to play Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. Anyway, you finally finished it. My first question that I just need to know is how long did it take to finish it?
120-something hours. It's
Jesus Christ, that's Persona 5 Royal Link.
Yes, this was Persona 5 Royal. Obviously, my overall take, this is a fucking amazing game. It's incredible. Like if you're into the Yakuza, you know that you're going to play this game or you've already played it. I definitely would not play this without playing Yakuza Like a Dragon / Yakuza 7. Like you definitely need to play the first Ichiban game because that's also so good. But I think it would help make the story a lot more fun if you had at least that background. But you don't necessarily need to have played all the Kiryu stuff to do this one. But it's a phenomenal game. I will say I do think it's a bit too big for its own good. Like if I have one criticism of it, it's the largesse is a bit too much for it. It is a game that reminds me kind of Yakuza 4 and Yakuza 5, which are also just huge behemoth fucking games. Partially because those games have like 4 and then 5 playable characters. So those games go fucking... Yakuza 5 is legitimately fucking crazy. Yakuza 5 has a 25-hour section of that game where you play as Haruka as a 16-year-old pop idol that replaces all of the fucking hand-to-hand combat with a rhythm minigame. It is insane. Yakuza 5 is great. It is also like a 100-hour-long video game that's maybe too big for its own good. And I do think that Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth... It is fucking huge, but it is still phenomenal. Like, I don't want to say that as a way to, like, scare people away, but it is definitely, if I were ranking these games, 0 is still at the top. I think 7 is below that. I think 8 is below 7. So it's, like, way up there. And then probably, like, 6 is probably about the same tier as 8 for me. But it is, man, this game is fucking huge. Because I think the last time I started talking about it was right around the time near... the middle of the game, / 2/3 through, I don't know.
You were deep in the Animal Crossing thing, whatever that was called.
Yes, because I was doing Dondoko Island, and then I had just, I think, started the part of the game where you split the party up, and then you'd have Kiryu goes back to Japan, and then Kiryu basically hooks up with all of the party members from 7. First game is a weird way to rephrase it, but the first Ichiban game. So from 7, he hooks up with them and starts a party with them, while Ichiban stays in... Hawaii with the new party members, and you continue that story, and then it jumps between chapters. That's maybe about the halfway point of the game. The game is so long, it's kind of hard for you to like say what was the halfway point, but that kind of feels narratively like it's the midpoint of the game. And then that is also around the time where you start doing a lot of Dondoko Island stuff. So yeah, I mean, a big part of the runtime for me was I just got totally sucked into Dondoko Island. I did the whole thing. I finished the Dondoko Island story. I unlocked all the parts of the island, which this is the Animal Crossing minigame. And then I just kept on doing it for a while because it was very fun, because you keep on meeting people in the story and through side missions that you can get invite to your island and have them come to your island. And so you just have like, just weird ass people, like the weird cult leader who was in a side quest in 0 and 6. He shows up in a side quest in this one. And you can have him, and he comes to your island, and he's just like, oh, here's the like weird cult man. Like, hey, I love you. Like, you're a cool dude. And just all the random motherfuckers you meet, some of them classic characters like Date-san from the old Yakuza games shows up, and he can come to your island when you do enough side missions with Date-san, and then he's on your island, and you can just go see him, go spend money at the brothel you set up and all the fucking wacky shit, and you just make more and more elaborate and very sort of seedy establishments in your weird Animal Crossing island, and it never stops feeling funny to build a weird Animal Crossing island game where you're putting down, here's a bar, here's a hostess club, here's a soap land. Like, it's so good, and that core concept is fucking hilarious. So I spent a lot of time in Dondoka Island. You don't need to do any of the Dondoka Island stuff. Like, so, you know, it's a game that could be much shorter if you don't do that, but it's so addicting. It's so much fun, because when you get to the end part and you've unlocked all the island, now it's about sort of min-maxing and making the absolute perfect thing where I've got all my ramen stalls set up, and here's where I have my golden statue of Kiryu, and I have all my lights set up so everyone can say, like, here's Kiryu, he's our, like, patron saint of this island, and we can go worship him, because I had a whole area just dedicated to my golden statue of Kiryu. It's a good time. But that's its whole own world, incredibly fun. In terms of, like, the main story stuff, there's a lot going on with this game, and it's so phenomenal. You know, I think it does get away from itself a little bit. Like, where the largesse of the game hurts it, I think, is it's hard for the game to fully manage the split protagonist structure in the second half, because I think Kiryu ends up, and this might be a biased thing also for me, of where, you know, I've just played so many Kiryu games. When he goes off on his own, he's such a magnetic character that, like, it's kind of inevitably for me, my interest kind of follows along with him a little bit more. And Ichiban's side of the story ends up slowing down a lot because Kiryu kind of takes part of the main plot with him when he goes to Japan. And I do think, like, the game has a hard time fully balancing those things. And it's something where it's not as elegant as Yakuza 0, which was another dual protagonist thing. But Yakuza 0 was smart in never directly intersecting Majima and Kiryu's storyline in that game. And so it felt like they both had these parallel plot lines that were totally independent and self-developed, that, like, you know, in a broad plot sense, they're both, like, kind of revolving around the same series of events, but they didn't directly intersect, and it was more thematically they communicated with each other. And here, I think there's a little bit of, like, too much, like, mush between these two stories, where it's not always clear, like, the pacing and the momentum and all the motivations and stuff get a little bit mixed up because you're jumping between these two sections, in a way that I almost kind of wish they did the Alan Wake 2 thing that also had a dual protagonist setup, where Alan Wake 2 lets you pick when you switch between the two characters. I think that would have actually helped this game if I could have just done the Kiryu side of the story up until basically right before the last chapter, and then switched over and did all the Ichiban stuff in a row, which is a way you could do Alan Wake 2 if you wanted. Like, I think it would have been good if they had left some of that up into your hands. So I have a little bit of a criticism of the game over that, but it's an understandable one because of how much material it's covering. But each individual story on its own is so good. And Kiryu's storyline about him, when he comes back to Japan, he has cancer, which is part of the premise of the game. He's sort of chosen not to get it treated, because he tried to have it treated, and it, like, seemed like it wasn't really working out, and he sort of gave up on it. And so his side of the story is a lot of the characters from 7, like Namba, Psycho. You get I'm blanking on her name, but the woman who's the leader of the Kami Jewel, Songhee, who she was a major supporting character but wasn't actually a party member. She's the incredibly badass Korean lady who runs the Korean mafia in 7, who you were, like, desperately wish was a party member, but she wasn't. She becomes a party member in this game. And so it's him teaming up with them, and then you also get Cho, who is the Hanpin Luma, the Yokohama Lumang. I forget what they call them in the English version, but the Hanpin Luman, which is another mafia gang, and he's like the guy who's like a cook, and he's super badass, and he joins you as well at a certain point. And so Kiryu's storyline is a lot of, like, him going around Yokohama with these people who kind of are refusing to give up on him because he is this guy who is an absolute legend, and their idea is, like, we want to show him that, like, to try to give treatment another chance, to kind of, like, to, like, give him the spark to kind of chase after life again, because, of course, in Kiryu's storyline at this point, he has had his own death faked. He has cut himself off from all the people he used to know, because if he interacts with them again, they will be put into danger. That's in the sort of side game, The Man Who Erased His Name goes into all that stuff in really big detail. But that has still like is following him around, and like he doesn't get to be himself anymore. He has to live by a pseudonym and all this kind of stuff. So you kind of feel that he has felt like his fight is over. He's kind of given up. But you have all these younger people, because even Namba, who's like a 40-year-old man, is younger compared to Kiryu, because Kiryu, I think, is almost 60 years old at this point. He's getting up there. They all hold him in such high regard that they're like trying to give him that spirit back and lift him back up. And that side of the game is so unique and so special. And some of the most fun I had in the game was honestly not even the main story part of it. It was just when you switch to Kiryu and you have this party and they open up this kind of series of side quests that are about you just kind of walking around the city and finding things, and Kiryu kind of relives little memories, and they're just like brief little like kind of like images and text and stuff that come up that's him like remembering, oh, here's this like, batting center thing. Remember all that crazy shit at a batting centers I've been like, and you sort of flashes to like, oh yeah, he got in a knife fight with Majima in a batting center, and then there was like, oh, there's that weird dude in Yakuza 5 who was a former baseball player that Kiryu became friends with. And he kind of walks through memory lane. You go do a bunch of the mini games. Kiryu inherits all of the different main character mechanics, like he can go around and he has chats with the party members around in the open world. And so there's this very long section where if you're doing the side stuff when you take control of Kiryu, you get to kind of see these relationships flesh out, both like him just kind of reflecting on his past, but also between all these different party members. And I think one of the things that makes it a super compelling part of the game is that there's this really interesting dynamic where none of these people really know him because it's none of his friends. It's not the characters from the previous Kiryu games. It's people who you know as the player through their relationships with Ichiban, and they only know Kiryu because he is this like badass Yakuza dude who showed up near the end of the previous game and helped them out. And so seeing that and seeing Kiryu through this very, very different lens, and see him develop these different kinds of relationships with these party members, it's very interesting and it's very gratifying. And as like an old school Yakuza fan who loves Kiryu as a character, it's really a powerful, interesting story. But I also just think it kind of tells a different sort of story than you normally get in games, because you just don't get these kinds of settings of modern day, contemporary people experiencing contemporary problems. Like when is the last time you had a game that was about a character dealing with the fact that they've been diagnosed with cancer? It's a thing that's very common subject matter in other media. Games very rarely cover it because it's not a thing that, you're usually going to do in your sci-fi or fantasy game or something like that. And so it just gives it such a different valence than what you normally expect from these sorts of games. And then you also get a much sort of more elaborate side content there that involves Date-san, the detective, who's basically Kiryu's best friend, who is also involved in how Kiryu's whole faking his death thing worked out. Like Date-san was involved in that, so he knows that Kiryu's been alive. He comes in and is kind of like, hey, Kiryu, I know you are actually dying now. Like, you have cancer. Like, it seems like, you maybe don't have a lot of time left. I know you have your new friends or whatever have come up with this thing of they want to kind of give you this new spark of chasing after life again. And he decides to help him with that by bringing in all these old people Kiryu used to know and have Kiryu kind of be off on the side because he can't have any of these people from his old life see him. But you have these great scenes between Date-san, and some of which are kind of relatively minor characters from previous games, like the guy who ran a taxi company that Kiryu worked at in 5 when Kiryu had to go kind of underground. And you kind of bring in some of these older characters and have Date-san kind of talk them through what their history with Kiryu was from the assumption from their point of view that Kiryu is dead. And it's kind of It's a Wonderful Life-esque sort of thing you're getting of Kiryu getting to see the impact he's had on other people's lives. And it's a really great story, and it's particularly fun to see Date-san and some of those characters come back and get to be have some big new material and everything. So that side of the story is phenomenal. And then obviously you've got all the stuff with Ichiban, where at this point of the game is where you know who the sort of main villain is, who I have to say one of the real treats of this game is that the main bad guy is voiced by Toru Furuya of Amuro fame.
Yes.
In Gundam, amongst obviously many other things, but for the Weekly Stuff Gundam people, he's obviously Amuro, but he's a little bit more in the Ribbons All Mark mode here, which is the
Fuck,
villain
that's
from Double
that's
O.
the number one thing you could say to make me fucking play this game. Oh my god.
The number two thing I can say is that his character isn't Japanese. He's a Hawaiian dude who's a cult leader. And there is a lot of Todofuria saying things in English in this game, and it fucking rules. Because he can't really speak English, but he's good enough at it that he's not just phonetically reading it. So he's actually acting. It's not just the like thing you sometimes get where this character has to say a word in English or whatever. It's a Japanese actor who does not know any more English than what they learned in fucking middle school, and they just phonetically read it out. He's actually giving a performance. It's, you know, he is not a native English speaker. It's with a very thick accent, but it's very good. Like, the character's great. I fucking love it's such a great villain. All the shit at the end of the game when you get to go fight him and stuff, and the context around it is phenomenal. And it's a very different villain that you've had before in a Yakuza game. It's an incredible performance. And that character, when he starts coming into focus as like, oh wait, this is the guy. Like, okay, this is, I think, is like where it's like really coming down to is he's the main bad guy. It's just fucking great. All that stuff is absolutely phenomenal. There's an incredible climax to the game where you have kind of a dual climax with your two protagonists, and how they handle all of that is phenomenal. But again, I do have a bit of a Kiryu bias. I feel like his side of the story, Kiryu's last scene, is just fucking, oh my god. Like, the performance that Kurota Takia, the actor who plays Kiryu, gives, it's just out of this world good. Everything about the narrative, where it kind of, and this is a line that was in one of the trailers, but it's where the story like kind of goes once they split the protagonists, is there's this overall sense of what the story's kind of doing is Kiryu is taking on sort of the legacy of the Yakuza, right? A lot of the stuff in the plot is dealing with the fallout of 7, where the Yakuza have been technically disbanded, broadly speaking. Like, the two major families, the Tojo and Omi clans, were disbanded at the end of 7. And so much of 8 is about the fallout of this choice, where you have this flood of ex-Yakuza people who are now trying to re-enter society. And there are people who are trying to exploit that or prevent that from happening. And your goal, both as Ichiban and Kiryu in different ways, is about allowing these people who were members of the Yakuza to re-enter society and make that a thing that they can do and give these people a second chance. And so the core themes of the game are about like forgiveness, getting a second chance, rehabilitation. Like, that's very much what it's about, which is also interesting because it kind of makes it of a piece with Lost Judgment in some ways, which is the detective game series they also have. The sequel, Lost Judgment, is also about a lot of those same ideas. They're in like a school setting. But it's like a really interesting themes. And so Kiryu's thing is he is taking on the past of the Yakuza, and he's telling Ichiban, like, I'm entrusting you with the future. And that, again, that's a line from one of the trailers where they kind of split. And so Kiryu's kind of bringing in, here's the legacy, here's like all the awful things that the Yakuza have done, the things that Kiryu as a character could have potentially prevented, but never really did. There's a lot of self-reflection in this game on a key moment in the original Yakuza game, where Kiryu becomes the 4th chairman of the Tojo clan, and then steps down from that position more or less immediately. Because he is not the kind of guy who really could run the clan. I think anyone who knows his character knows he's not the dude at the top. But the whole series is about him, in so many ways, dealing with the fallout of the choice of walking away from that position. And him trying to sort of create a world where the Tojo clan can exist without him, because he can't be the guy who runs it. But here at the end, seemingly at the end of his life, right, he is looking back on that choice and saying, oh, well, if I had stayed in charge, could I have changed things? Could I have made life better, not just for the people in the Yakuza, but for all the people whose lives the Yakuza have ruined? And so he is trying to take on all of that. And some of the antagonists are people who represent these sort of like the scars that the Yakuza left behind in society. That means that society is not so keen on the idea of giving those people a second chance. And then Kasuga is out there. He is dealing with the people who are trying to exploit the members of Yakuza who are trying to re-enter society. And he is trying to prevent that from happening and kind of build something that will allow the Yakuza people to come in and have a second chance and re-enter this world. And so while in the middle section of the game, I think it gets a little bit sort of wishy-washy is the wrong word, but like it sort of gets a bit meandering where there's so much narrative material split across two protagonists in two different countries that each of them have 5 party members. Like, it's so much. It's like at a certain point, you're kind of playing 2 JRPGs at the same time, and it's a lot for the game to handle. And so that's where that largesse comes in. But when you get to the last chapter, which is very long, the last chapter is like 6 hours or something. It's by far the longest chapter any of these games have had. But like that last chapter is incredible, and having these sort of like dual climaxes with these 2 characters, one in Japan, one in Hawaii, one dealing with the legacy of the Yakuza, one dealing with the future of where these people need to go, and then how all of that sort of dovetails into where they leave Kiryu and Ichiban at the end, which obviously won't spoil, but like how all those stories wrap up. I just think it's incredible. It absolutely like nails the landing. It makes me incredibly excited for future games to seeing what they continue to do. And it's just like, yeah, it is a game that has its flaws, and is definitely, I think, not as kind of tight and focused as 7 was, broadly speaking. But kind of like Lost Judgment also, you know, there's clear similarities between those 2 projects as sequels to these kind of like original stories, which they had not done in such a long time, making continuous sequels to Kiryu games. Both of them have these issues of having kind of like bloated stories that feel a little bit unfocused in places, but when they narrow in at the end, the material that this story is dealing with, kind of like with Lost Judgment, is really sophisticated and complicated and has a lot going on, and there's a lot of meat on that bone. So it's I think it has ultimately a more complex story than 7 did. Which for me ultimately like makes up for a lot of the issues I had in the kind of meandering middle part, and makes it very well worth seeing through to the end, because the ending stuff is just incredible. So it's a great game. Obviously, all the gameplay system stuff, I've talked about that on earlier podcasts, but the combat, all that is great. When you unlock, oh my god, I can't believe I haven't talked about this yet. If you unlock the ability. And I know this has been in trailers and stuff because I knew it was in the game, but when you actually do it, it's just the fucking best thing in the world. Maybe the greatest thing in any turn-based RPG ever is unlocking the special meter with Kiryu that allows you to just hold down R2, where they use the adaptive trigger thing too, so you have to like really pull in on it, and this meter charges up, it goes, and then it blows up your turn-based menu, like the buttons that you press to say attack and all that shit just explodes off the screen, and now you're just playing Kiryu running in and beating the shit out of people like it's a old beat 'em up Yakuza game. And you have like a meter where you can get to do that for like 30 seconds, and it's so good. And they reuse all these animations from the beat 'em up games, where if it's basically when you go into extreme heat mode in Yakuza 6 and stuff like that, where you have these like special attacks that then zoom in on the dude's face as you kick it, and it goes into slow motion, and you just see these people get the absolute shit kicked out of them, and they're completely powerless to stop you because they're still in turn-based mode, and Kiryu has broken the turn-based mechanics and is just going to kick their asses. And it's about the best thing in any video game I've ever seen. It's so funny, and they do a lot of really good stuff with that mechanic when you get some other characters from old Yakuza games, some old favorites that you'd expect to be here to show up on the Kiryu side of the story. They show up, and they do some cool things with those mechanics as well, and it's fucking great. That is on the gameplay side. I think that is like the big thing that I had not yet done the last time I talked about the game, and it's like some of the most fun you'll ever have in a game like this. It's just blowing up the turn-based menu and just going and kicking the shit out of people. It's so funny.
I want to play this so bad. Oh my gosh, this sounds great. What are you thinking after you're done with Kakarot, what do you think is your next big video game project?
Oh god.
Do you want to do Final Fantasy VII Rebirth with me so we can talk about it together?
Sure, yeah. Yeah. That's good, because that just makes the decision for me, because I've been waffling between Persona 3 Reload and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but I was like, I'm just going to play Dragon Ball Z Kakarot because I'm tired of trying to make this choice.
Yeah.
And then Dragon's Dogma 2 has come out, and I definitely want to play Dragon's Dogma 2. But also that feels like a game to wait a little bit for patches also. And Rebirth has had quite a few patches, so I feel like I can get that and not feel like, oh, now they're going to patch like the good mode in.
My brother has been playing it, and he said that there's a patch that just came out that addressed image quality and was pretty noticeable.
Yeah, so it feels like now's a good time to jump in. So yeah, I think that's the next thing I'll play once I do the Kakarot DLC, which I don't get the impression that DLC is super long. So I think probably by next week I'll be back on the Final Fantasy VII train.
I did start playing. I had never played the Yuffie DLC that was in the PS5 version of FF7 Remake, and I'm playing that. I started playing that last night. It's very good. The music for it is just incredible, and Yuffie they do such a great job with as a character. I don't even care that I still don't like the combat of that game. But have you played that DLC yet?
No, I've not. So yeah, I'll probably pick that up.
Do the same thing.
That. Yes, as well.
Yeah. All right, well, more games, more stuff, more Japanimation Station, more anime. Oh my God, we're busy, but it's fun. Anything else to say to the people before we leave them for now, Sean?
Video games are good. Anime is good. It's a lot, but it's fun. That's what I have to say.